Without the cultivation level of 10 meridians, it was really very difficult to interfere in the battle between two king tiers. Those like Nieyang, Lao Lian and Tan Gaobo were completely insufficient. A mere 7 meridians or 8 meridians was not even qualified to charge up and deliver a sword strike in this kind of battle. Only a 9 meridians or 8 meridians could be considered battle prowess. However, the 9 meridians could only circle around and fight. The python's skin was thick and tough, and it was extremely powerful. If one was swept by its tail or its body collided with them, their skin would definitely split open and bones would be broken. Right now, there were only 9 people who were truly battling. Aside from Sima Rong, the other 8 people were all at the cultivation level of 9 meridians. As for the others, they were truly minor characters. Ling Han didn't make a move. Since they were competing to see who could kill the giant python, why was he rushing so quickly? He was observing the giant python's attacks, and he could clearly see the weak points in its attacks. He had just lost power, but his insight and judgment would not decrease. Add to that the fact that he was cultivating the demonic monkey fists. What kind of superior technique was this? It was really nothing difficult for him to see through the attack of a mere 10 meridians. It wasn't long before Ling Han saw through the giant python's attack patterns. A smile involuntarily tugged at the corners of his lips. Get lost! Get lost! You trash! Don't get in my way! Sima Rong roared loudly. Pong, 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 2 punches shot out and actually sent the 2 cultivators that were blocking in front of him flying. Previously, they had only been sent flying by the force he had released, so it was understandable. After all, he hadn't directly attacked anyone. Now, however, it was a completely different story. The 2 sect elders of these 2 cultivators instantly wore furious expressions. They all looked towards Chao Tsong. This was a member of Blue Feather CIT, so they naturally had to demand an explanation from Chao Tsong. Chao Tsong merely stroked his beard and smiled. It is a competition, so it is inevitable that there would be some stumbling over one another. Take one of my break dragon flash. Sima Rong leaped up high and pulled back his right fist, as if he was accumulating power. Visibly, there were layers of light wrapped around his fist. What? The elites exclaimed in astonishment. After advancing into 10 meridians, one could release their power and could be called a king tier. However, power was invisible and could not be seen with the naked eye. Now, Sima Rong's punch actually had a halo of light wrapped around it. That was a scene that would only appear when power was compounded. A 10 meridians power was already terrifying enough. From 30,000 kilograms at the very least, their peak could reach 50,000 kilograms. With this added together, how terrifying would their destructive power be? What kind of technique was this break dragon flash? So impressive. Ling Han's eyes also flashed. Though his power had exceeded 50,000 kilograms, he definitely could not overlap his power like this. However, within the demonic monkey fists, this was actually a very ordinary technique. However, limited by his cultivation level, Ling Han was still unable to do this. This kind of layering did not mean that the power of 50,000 kilograms would become 100,000 kilograms or 200,000 kilograms. Instead, it was a continuous barrage of attacks, with practically no pause. Pong! Sima Rong's figure descended, and a heavy punch landed. Even if the giant python was an anomaly with naturally thick skin and tough flesh, it still couldn't withstand such a bombardment. With a shake of its massive snake's head, its whole body was sent flying in a slanting arc. A large part of the place where his fist landed had clearly caved in, as if it had been harshly struck by a massive rock, and one could imagine just how painful it had to be with one look. Everyone inhaled sharply. Even the giant python, a creature that was born with astonishing defenses, had been punched into such a state. If it was a human, then even if he was hidden in an armor forged from refined metal, he would probably still be smashed into a pancake, right? It should be overlapping power 4 times. Ling Han judged. He had seen in the demonic monkey fists that the limit of overlapping power was 108 layers. This naturally far surpassed Sima Rong. However, while this might be the limit, it did not mean that whoever cultivated it would definitely be able to reach it. I have to reach 10 meridians as soon as possible. Only then would I be able to release my power and cultivate the power of overlap, Ling Han thought. Otherwise, if it was power alone that reached 10 meridians, he still could not be called a king tier. Hiss, this is overlapping 5 layers of power, right? Someone among the king tiers also exclaimed in shock. There aren't as many as 5 layers. It should be 4 layers of overlapped power, Meng Ruining said in a deep voice. He was a 12 meridians, so he could see things more clearly. 4 layers is already terrifying enough, the old woman said, her eyes burning. The gaze she directed at Sima Rong was a little strange. Among the techniques we've obtained, we can only stack 3 layers of power at most. Old Venom chuckled and said, Chao Tsong, you're really hiding your strength. Sima Rong was brought here by Chao Tsong, and all his abilities must have been taught by Chao Tsong. However, no one knew how stunned Chao Tsong was at this moment. He had indeed taught Sima Rong, but he had definitely not taught him anything about the break dragon flash that could overlap power 4 times. If he really grasped this kind of secret technique, he would definitely treat it as his trump card. He would definitely not pass it on until the moment of his death. This disciple had gone out to train for a few years, so why had it become that he did not even recognize him after his return? Ha ha ha! A mere demonic beast. You think you can be insolent in front of me? Sima Rong was more and more arrogant. He charged out and blasted the giant python madly. Under the suppression of the 4 layers of power, it was equivalent to having 4 Sima Rong attacking it at the same time. Even if the giant python was a demonic beast and was born stronger than humans in terms of physique, it could only match 2 to 3 10 meridians at most, but 4? It definitely couldn't beat them. Hence, the giant python was instantly blasted into a sorry state, leaving behind pieces of scales on the ground. In a one-on-one situation, being able to suppress a demonic beast of the same cultivation level was really too shocking. The younger generation were all convinced. If they were to fight a demonic beast of the same cultivation level, it was absolutely impossible that they would have such a crushing advantage. Don't be discouraged, Sun Jianfang said. Before 10 meridians, it's indeed very difficult for us cultivators to contend with demonic beasts, because the natural conditions of our bodies are too different. However, as long as we advance into 10 meridians and can release our power, and the technique we cultivate can truly begin to show its might, this is the true time for cultivators to rise. Hearing his words, the youngsters finally regained their fighting spirit. They were inferior to Sima Rong, not because they were inferior in natural talent, but rather because they had not reached 10 meridians yet. However, the older generation shook their heads internally. This was not just a gap in cultivation level but also a difference in technique. For example, the technique they cultivated could only reach 3 overlapping layers of power. Even though there was only 1 less overlapping layer of power, how could 3 against 4 be the same? They naturally would not say these words, to avoid damaging the confidence of these young people. After all, they were all their descendants and disciples. The king tiers of the older generation all shook their heads. Looks like there should be no doubt about Sima Rong's victory, and he was now 10 meridians. If he ingested the volcanic fruit, wouldn't he immediately become 11 meridians? Hiss, a 24 to 25-year-old 11 meridians king tier was too inconceivable. Ling Han cracked his neck. It was time for him to take the field. He charged out. Ha ha ha! Ji Yuanlong laughed loudly and said, Old geezer's son, I thought your disciple was as cowardly as a mouse and didn't even dare to attack. Looks like I was wrong. This brat isn't cowardly, but rather slow in reaction, and not just by a little at that. All the elites laughed loudly. Since Sima Rong's victory was already a foregone conclusion, there was no harm in having some fun. Sun Jianfang remained calm and collected, and only revealed a faint smile. That may not be the case. Everyone, why don't you quietly take a closer look? Pong! Ling Han unleashed his power, and his figure was extraordinarily fast. This kind of explosive power really does seem a bit like 10 meridians. Meng Ruining was the first to exclaim in surprise. Not necessarily. Some people are born with natural speed, so it wouldn't be strange for the speed of a 9 meridians to be comparable to 10 meridians. If the ancient Tao sect could produce a young 10 meridians king tier, that would really be too incredible. Everyone couldn't believe it. It was already a miracle for such a young 10 meridians king tier to appear once. So how could there possibly be as many as 2? Just wait and see. Ling Han had already charged over. His iron fists clenched and he used the 4 directional fists. He delivered a heavy strike at the giant python. Pong! The giant python was currently engaged in a fierce battle with Sima Rong. So how could it bother about Ling Han? Instantly, it was hit head-on. Under the massive impact, it couldn't help but be sent flying 6 meters away, flattening the rocks that protruded from the ground. However, it was not made of copper and iron, after all. This friction caused it to shed a great many scales, and leave behind a considerable amount of blood. Hiss! Everyone inhaled sharply. This was definitely power of a 10 meridians. It had surpassed 30,000 kilograms, and had actually reached 50,000 kilograms. No. His power only exploded when his fist landed on the snake's body. Chao Tsung immediately saw through the truth of the matter. In other words, he didn't release his power. By unleashing one's power, he can hit his opponent faster and also effectively protect himself, avoiding the weakness of our physique. But he didn't use it. There can only be one reason for that. He's still a 9 meridians, everyone exclaimed in shock. This 9 meridians could possess the power of a 10 meridians, and it was a peak stage 10 meridians at that. How could they believe this? The two are freaks. Someone who has broken through to 10 meridians before 30 years old, and has even cultivated 4 overlapping layers of power. One of them looks to be only 20 years old. He's clearly a 9 meridians elite, yet he possesses the peak stage power of 10 meridians. Is this still the world of cultivation that we know? Sima Rong also raised a corner of his eyes. He was already 100% sure that he could kill the giant python. But Ling Han's sudden intrusion caused him slight surprise. What powerful strength! When had a 9 meridians become so awesome? However, he wanted to compete with him with just that. Without becoming a 10 meridians, he ultimately couldn't be called a king tier. You want to contend with me? Sima Rong charged over. His target wasn't the giant python, but Ling Han. He had a strong confidence that he would be able to easily suppress his opponents even if it was a battle of 2 against 1. Isn't this the competition that we had previously agreed on? Ling Han asked calmly. They were competing to see who would be able to kill the giant python first, so why was it that when it came to Sima Rong, for him to make a move was considered a fault? Humph! How could this hand be stretched randomly? Sima Rong no longer attacked the giant python first, and merely attacked Ling Han repeatedly. So what? Ling Han stepped forward without fear. Pong! The two of them exchanged a blow. Ling Han was using the 4 directional fists, while Sima Rong was still using that break dragon flash, overlapping 4 layers of power, each layer reaching strength as high as 50,000 kilograms. Ling Han's figure swayed, and he retreated 9 steps consecutively. Then, he retreated another 7 steps and then 5 steps again, and only then did he manage to stabilize himself. Sima Rong, on the other hand, did not retreat in the slightest. Could not be helped. Sima Rong was a 10 meridians, and when he released his power, Ling Han's punch had not landed on his body at all. Naturally, it could not possibly have any effect on him. And under the stacked attacks of 4 overlapping layers of power, Ling Han retreated repeatedly, retreating 3 consecutive times before he managed to steady his footing. This brat, his conventional power is actually superior to Sima Rong. That's right. Otherwise, he should have retreated 4 times, and not 3 times. His 50,000 kilograms of strength is actually not his limit. Everyone was stunned speechless. In this kind of exchange, though Ling Han was at a disadvantage in terms of true power, Ling Han was slightly superior. How could this be believed? A 9 meridians was actually even more powerful than a 10 meridians. Was this still a world that they knew? Sima Rong's eyes also narrowed. This was the first time that he felt threatened. A mere 9 meridians had actually surpassed him in terms of raw power. If it was not for the fact that he could release his power, and if it was not for the fact that he still had 4 overlapping layers of power, wouldn't he be at a disadvantage? If you don't become a 10 meridians elite, you're still an ant in the end, he said coldly. So what if you're freakish? In the end, you're only a 9 meridians elite. It's impossible for you to win against him. And as long as he ingested that volcanic fruit, he would be able to charge up to 11 meridians. At that time, he would then kill Ling Han. Even if Sun Jianfang interfered, so what? Even if he couldn't fight him to a tie, he would at least be able to retreat unscathed. Is that so? Ling Han asked calmly. His fists moved, and every move he made was a head-on clash with Sima Rong. However, this wasn't just a battle between the two of them. The giant python also approached and launched an attack. In its eyes, Sima Rong and Ling Han were both enemies, so it naturally treated them the same. With a sweep of its tail, the two of them were attacked at the same time. This had become a battle royale between 3 sides. Ling Han, Sima Rong, and the giant python had to fight 2 other opponents at the same time. This was not only dangerous but also more exhausting. How long can you last? Sima Rong sneered. He couldn't release his power, so Ling Han could only take each blow head-on. The weakness of his physique would undoubtedly be exposed, and he definitely wouldn't be able to last more than a few moves. Ling Han ignored him. Aside from Brother Monkey, no one knew just how astonishing his vitality was. Though his whole body had gone numb from the attacks of Sima Rong and the giant python, he would recover in an instant. Even if a wound was really left behind, the bleeding would very quickly stop and scab over. This was a unique trait that he had obtained from the Divine Stone. He had once been the strongest heavenly venerate, so how could it possibly have no benefit at all? Contrary to everyone's expectations, Ling Han was especially durable. Several hundred moves had already passed, and he could still keep up a defensive and an offensive. He wasn't the first to collapse. On the other hand, Sima Rong and the giant python encountered the biggest problem. Their power was close to exhaustion. Couldn't be helped. Their power was stored in their meridians, and only when the sun first rose would they be able to sense the mystical power of heaven and earth. When they cultivated, they would either replenish their energy or use the spirit-gathering formation to extract the power of the jade seeds. But now, both of them could not do that. This power could only be unleashed and there was no replenishment, so naturally, the more they fought, the less it would become. In the end, they would be exhausted. Ling Han, on the other hand, was a fresh force, and his meridians had been opened wide enough, so he could store even more power than 10 meridians. Then, he would definitely be able to last longer than Sima Rong and the giant python. Sima Rong could not believe it. He would actually be defeated in this manner? He couldn't accept this. A king tier of 10 meridians was actually going to lose to a 9 meridians. No matter what the reason was, this was a great humiliation, and he would be laughed at to death. Scram! Ling Han threw a heavy punch. The advantage of the 4 directional fists was that they could allow power to be steadily unleashed without any fluctuations in force. Pong! Sima Rong was instantly sent flying. After using all his power, he was actually not much stronger than an ordinary person. Meanwhile, Ling Han charged toward the giant python. Pong, pong, pong! He threw 19 consecutive punches. Although these weren't overlapping layers of power, the speed of his punches was fast enough. Each punch landed on about the same spot, and the power of his punches wasn't much weaker than that. After 19 punches, the giant python's head was forcefully blown apart by Ling Han. A creature like the python was very active. Even if it had lost its head, it did not die immediately. Instead, it churned on the ground, sending sand and rocks flying. However, the result was already out. The person who had killed the giant python was Ling Han. Who could have imagined this before? Sima Rong was panting heavily, and the gaze he directed at Ling Han was filled with fury and confusion. How could a 9 meridians be so strong? Ha 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 ha! Sun Jianfang laughed loudly. Ling Han had really done him proud this time, suppressing his peers and becoming number 1. Humph! He merely took advantage of the situation, Chao Tsong said coldly, his face filled with displeasure. Although he didn't know how Sima Rong had broken through to 10 meridians, nor did he know where he had learnt the 4 overlapping layers of power from. This was a person of Blue Feather City. Sima Rong had lost, so he was also embarrassed. A 9 meridians fighting against a 10 meridians, If they win, what else is there to say? Sun Jianfang slanted a sideways glance at Chao Kong. Why don't we wait until Ling Han advances into the 10 meridians and have them fight again? These words rendered Chao Tsong speechless. This was because once Ling Han reached the 10 meridians, his power would definitely be able to suppress Sima Rong. At the same time, he would also be able to release his power, which eliminated his greatest weakness. Even if Sima Rong had 4 overlapping layers of power, it would probably be very difficult for him to win. After all under the crushing pressure of absolute power, even with 4 overlapping layers of power, he would still be defeated. A loss is a loss. Everyone, this volcanic fruit belongs to our ancient Tao sect. There's no problem, right? Sun Jianfang chuckled. All the elders were speechless. They were all people who cared about their pride, so how could they take back their own words? Moreover, the ones who truly made the decisions were the supreme king tiers of 12 meridians. They themselves didn't need the volcanic fruit, so at most, they would only feel some discomfort and resentment, but wouldn't feel the pain directly. Let's go! Ji Yuanlong waved his hand. He had the worst temper and always liked to argue with others, but those with explosive tempers were also straightforward. Everyone shook their heads, preparing to leave. They faltered for a moment before raising their heads to look at the sky. A colossal shadow cast down, and a massive ship appeared in the skies. It was completely black in color and looked like a metallic monster. What was this thing? The older generation had all seen planes with their own eyes, and the younger generation had also seen the information of flying vessels on the optical computer, and knew that there was something that could fly in the air without relying on wings. But the problem here was, there was no flying machine that could match this one in the skies. However, aside from those with propellers, there were no other flying devices that could fly at such a slow speed. In fact, they could even hover in midair. Furthermore, no one had seen anything resembling propellers on this battleship. This battleship wasn't small. It was about 90 meters long, and even if placed in water, it was a large ship. As it floated in midair, it cast a huge shadow. There was an emblem at the bow of the ship, and there was a 5-clawed golden dragon drawn on it. It was vivid and lifelike, as if it could come to life. Everyone was stunned. Ling Han was also stunned, because wasn't this the warship of the Genesis world? It could be driven by formations and could be fast or slow, and could move or be still. In this world, this was something that definitely should not have appeared. Could it be that this had been dug out from an ancient site of the civilization of the last era? Ling Han couldn't confirm whether this was dug out from the ground or created after obtaining an ancient technique, but he definitely couldn't underestimate it, because there were black cannon muzzles protruding from the body of the ship, giving him an extremely terrifying feeling of threat. This battleship slowly descended amidst everyone's shock. Thankfully, this mountain peak was big enough. Otherwise, if it was any other mountain peak, it really might not be able to accommodate it. After the warship landed, a floating ladder was thrown down from the bow of the ship, and people gradually walked down from it. There were only 10 people in total, and their leader was a woman who looked to be only in her mid-20s. She was in the prime of her life, and her skin was so delicate that it looked like water could drip from it. Even if she was only covered with her hands, neck and face exposed, she still had a kind of captivating beauty. She was dressed in a dark green tight-fitting outfit, completely outlining her voluptuous figure, especially her shapely bottom, over which the leather material was tightly stretched. The shape was completely obvious, as if she was a ripe peach. She showed off her alluring grace, but the 9 men behind her looked straight ahead, as if the person walking in front of them was not a woman at all. Sima Rong pays his respects to the Captain Lien. Sima Rong rushed out, kneeling on one knee. Seeing this scene, all the higher-ups were stunned. As a 10 Meridian King tier, he actually knelt down to pay his respects. King tiers naturally had the pride of King tiers. How could they be so humble and subservient? Chao Tsong's expression darkened. To a certain extent, a King tier of 10 Meridians could already represent a force. Now that Sima Rong had knelt down in front of others, it was equivalent to kneeling down together with the pride of Blue Feather City. So how could he not be angered? Sima Rong, what are you doing? He asked harshly. However, Sima Rong ignored him completely and continued to kneel steadily. The beauty in dark green attire glanced at Chao Tsung, parted her bright red lips and said, "To dare make a ruckus in front of me, what should the offender be punished with? 30 slaps." A man behind her said, "Execute the punishment." The beauty in black said calmly, "Yes." The man immediately walked out. Though he had been standing behind the beauty in black just now, like a bodyguard, the moment he stepped out, he was exuding a powerful aura, as if he had become a completely different person. Chao Tsung's expression involuntarily changed slightly. This man was only in his 30s, but the feeling he gave off was filled with pressure. Could it be that this person was also a top-notch king tier of 12 meridians? The problem was that this man was only in his 30s, so how could he possibly be a 12 meridians? "Old geezer, you've already lived for so long, yet you still don't know how to control your mouth," the man said coldly. With a bounce, he charged over. Boom! He threw a punch, and instantly, a series of sonic booms rang out. However, the speed at which the sonic boom spread couldn't compare to his punch. He had just raised his hand, when his fist had already landed in front of Chao Tsung humphed, and raised his right hand, blocking this punch. Pong, the two of them clashed in close-quarter combat, but did not come into a solid contact. Instead, they stopped about 3 feet apart, as if there was an invisible wall between them that was blocking the both of them. Power was released. This was a battle between king tiers. Boom, the force reverberated, and the two of them took a few steps back at the same time. This time, the expressions of Sun Jianfeng and the others all became solemn. In this blow, though Chao Tsung was not at a disadvantage, he similarly did not have the upper hand either. This man was actually a 12 meridians. How was this possible? Previously, the appearance of Sima Rong, a 10 meridians, was already enough to stun everyone to the point of disbelief. Now, another 30-year-old 12 meridians elite had appeared? Heavens, what was wrong with this world? Desolate natives are indeed weak. The man laughed loudly and attacked again. This time, he was not just throwing a casual punch. Instead, multiple layers of light condensed on his fist. 5 overlapping layers of power. Ji Yuanlong's eyes lit up, and his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Just now, when Sima Rong used the 4 overlapping layers of power, it was already enough to make people drop their glasses in shock. And now here was another person that could use 5 overlapping layers of power? A 30-year-old 12 meridians and 5 overlapping layers of power added together created too much of an impact. Most importantly, this guy that Sun Jianfeng and the others thought was freakish was actually just a subordinate of the beauty in black clothing. This was undoubtedly even more unacceptable. They could only hope that this man had only submitted to the woman in black because he coveted her beauty. Otherwise, it would be unbelievable. Chao Tsung charged forwards with all his might, but the raw power of both sides was more or less equal. However, one could only fire out 3 overlapping layers of power, while the other could fire out 5 overlapping layers of power. The gap between them was naturally extremely wide. To make an unsuitable analogy, this was equivalent to 5 people fighting 3 people, and each person's strength was more or less equal. Then who would win and who would lose? Chao Tsung was soon at a disadvantage. Under the crushing pressure of his opponent's 5 overlapping layers of power, he struggled to hold on, completely unable to fight back. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't have a chance to turn the tables. This was because under the weight of the 5 overlapping layers of power, his opponent's power would definitely be exhausted far more than his. Thus, as long as he could hold on until his opponent's power was exhausted, he would be able to obtain victory easily. But the problem was, he could not hold on for that long. His opponent's attacks were endless, like mercury dripping onto the ground, wave after wave, making him feel like he could collapse at any moment. "Brother Chao, I'll help you," Meng Ruining roared as he joined the battle. They had known each other since the beginning of the great upheaval of heaven and earth. Afterwards, though they had all established their own forces, they were not too far apart from each other. They would also have some contact with each other. If they encountered a powerful demonic beast that started a massive assault of demonic beasts, they would even help each other. Thus, now that an unfamiliar force had come, it was clear that they were being stepped on, so they naturally had to unite against a common enemy. Wang Feng, you go? The woman in black robes said calmly. Yes, Banner Lord. Behind her, another man walked out and approached Meng Ruining. Pung, pung, pung. The moment they exchanged blows, everyone was once again shocked. This man, who looked to be only in his 30s, was shockingly a top-notch king tier of 12 meridians. Moreover, he had also grasped 5 overlapping layers of power. He threw punch after punch, and Meng Ruining was completely at a disadvantage in just a single exchange. This caused Ji Yuanlong, the old woman, and the others who were about to step forward to stop. Could it be that the 9 people behind this woman were all elites of 12 meridians, and each of them could fire out 5 overlapping layers of power? This kind of lineup was too terrifying. It was enough to sweep aside any force. Don't meddle in other people's business, the woman in black said calmly. With a wave of her slender hand, a group of crossbowmen appeared from the ship, aiming their eerie crossbows at everyone. Being pointed at by these crossbows, everyone felt a strong chill, and were even more confused. It should be known that when one had reached 12 meridians, his reaction speed was extremely sharp. He was unafraid of even firearms because he could send a bullet flying with a single punch. However, being targeted by these crossbows, these elites felt even worse than being targeted by guns. No one dared to act rashly. Even Old Venom was well behaved. At first, he had wanted to show off and spread poison. No one helped, and Chao Tsong was very quickly defeated. He was slapped by that man, causing his face to flush red, and he even spat out blood. He was the lord of a city, and had several thousand people under his command. Moreover, he was standing at the peak of martial arts, yet now, he was being pressed onto the ground and slapped by an elite of the same cultivation level. How could he accept this? After that man had slapped Chao Tsong Xing 30 times, he immediately retreated, and stood behind the woman in black like a servant. On the other side, after Wang Feng sent Meng Ruining flying with a palm strike, he also retreated. He was only stopping Meng Ruining from helping. Chao Tsong spat out blood continuously. This was not because he had been severely injured, but rather because he had been angered. Only then did the woman in black look towards Sima Rong and wave her hand, saying, "Rise." "Thank you, Banner Lord." Sima Rong stood up. Though he had been kneeling for so long, there was not the slightest bit of displeasure on his face. Everyone was both curious and stunned. What kind of background did this woman have, that she could command so many 12 meridians king tiers, and also make Sima Rong abandon even his pride as a king tier? "I am Lien Shuerong, the Banner Lord of the Shenqing Banner of Huju City of the Dark North Nation," the woman in black clothing said. "I have come south this time to integrate all of you under the command of our Dark North Nation." Sun Jianfang and the others all sneered. They were all overlords of a region, so how could they tolerate being under someone else's command? Moreover, this wasn't a recruitment by the Dark North Nation. Instead, it was a recruitment by Huju City that was under its rule. In fact, it wasn't even the city lord who had personally come, but rather a banner lord. This was underestimating them too much, wasn't it? Lien Shuerong's eyes swept over them. Don't think that being under the rule of our Dark North Nation is an embarrassing matter. Humph. If it was not for the fact that His Imperial Majesty has the heart to bring good fortune to the whole world, who would be willing to set foot in such a desolate land? Just listen to what she was saying. Others were forced to surrender, and she even looked disdainful that she was even bothering with them. This really made them feel uncomfortable. "I'll give you 10 minutes to consider." Lien Shuerong waved her hand and looked at Sima Rong. "Did you find any good seedlings?" Sima Rong immediately swept a glance at Ling Han out of the corner of his eye, but he quickly withdrew it and said, "In reply to Banner Lord, in the desolate plains, it is difficult to find anyone outstanding." Lien Shuerong nodded slowly. This place was too remote, and martial arts was still in its budding stage. A 12 meridians was actually able to establish their own sect. What a huge joke. There were no outstanding talents here, so it was naturally not strange. Their conversation wasn't loud, so Sun Jianfang and the others didn't hear it. They only thought that Sima Rong was snitching about something. No wonder this person could break through to 10 meridians at 24 to 25 years old. Just look at him. The people that were casually sent out were all king tiers of 12 meridians, and they were only in their 30s. What ancient inheritance had this dark North nation obtained? Was there a special method that could allow one to advance into 10 meridians, or perhaps even higher? Banner Lord, there is a volcanic fruit under this pool. This subordinate has deliberately prepared it to you, Sima Rong continued. Volcanic fruit? Lien Shuerong smiled faintly. Although it's not all that valuable, it can still be considered treasured fruit. Wang Feng, go and check on the fruit. If it is ripe, pluck it. Wang Feng took a step forward and was just about to leap into the pool. However, Ling Han stepped forward and said, "Wait, brat. Do you have any objections?" Wang Feng scoffed. He naturally wouldn't take anyone here seriously. "Yes." Ling Han nodded. "This volcanic fruit is mine." "How so?" Wang Feng asked with a smile. "Did you plant this?" Ling Han pointed at the python in the distance and said, "This is the demonic beast guarding the treasured fruit. I killed it, so this treasured fruit should belong to me." "Oh!" Wang Feng looked surprised. With his experience, he only had to look at the size of that giant python to know that it was a 10 meridians demonic beast. This brat in front of him, could he be a 10 meridians? In this remote and desolate place, a 10 meridians elite that looked to be in his 20s could actually appear? How was this possible? "Young man, you're really blowing your own trumpet." Wang Feng laughed loudly. Naturally, he didn't believe him at all. Ling Han smiled faintly. "Then ask around. Who was the one who had killed this python?" Wang Feng faltered for a moment. This brat was so calm and composed. Could it be that he was really the one who had killed it? "Bullsh-t." Sima Rong hurriedly jumped out. "It was clearly me that had exhausted this demonic snake, and that was why you had the advantage." He knew what mission Lien Shuerong had, so he definitely couldn't let her know about Ling Han's freakish natural talent in cultivation. Otherwise, this brat would easily surpass him. This was something he definitely didn't want to see. Such a vile character? Lien Shuerong spoke up. The gaze she directed at Ling Han was filled with disdain. "Milady, this is the truth," Sun Jianfang said. It was clear that there were dangerous arrows aimed at him, but he was still willing to support Ling Han. Ling Han looked at the old geezer and couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. It was easy to add icing on the cake, but it was difficult to send coal in the snow. Only at this moment would one be able to see who was the person who truly treated him well. Lien Shuerong scoffed and said, "Little Chi, step out." "Yes, Banner Lord." A young man somersaulted and leaped down from the battleship. Pong! This battleship was over 30 meters tall, and the force of his descent was still a little shocking, shaking the ground slightly. This could only be considered a youth. He looked to be 16 or 17 years old at most, and looked a little quirky in personality. "You are 10 meridians. Go and fight him," Lien Shuerong said. "Yes." This young man bowed slightly towards Lien Shuerong, then walked towards Ling Han. What, this young man was actually 10 meridians. Everyone was dumbfounded. If that was really the case, then this dark North nation was too terrifying, wasn't it? Originally, Gu Tang, Nya Huayun, and the others were still conflicted and unwilling to live under someone else's power, but if they could open the door to the 12 meridians, they would all be tempted. There was only one volcanic fruit, so how could it be divided among them? "My name is Zhao Qi." The young man smiled at Ling Han. "You have to be careful. I will go all out. If you are boasting, you would only be killed by me." Xiao, he rushed out and shot out a palm strike, pressing down on Ling Han. As expected, his cultivation level was 10 meridians. Before his palm reached him, an invisible force had already reached him. Ling Han threw a punch. Pong! The force of his punch met the youth's attack, and like the blade of a saber, forcefully split apart the youth's force, which then swept past on either side of him. Yeah! Lien Shuerong, Wang Feng, and the others all exclaimed in shock. With such a clash, they naturally could see very clearly that Ling Han's power had indeed reached 10 meridians. Tisk, he's clearly only a 9 meridians elite, still unable to release his full power. However, his power has already reached the peak stage of 10 meridians. This is impressive enough. If he was in our city, he would probably be able to enter into the top 10, right? Such a prodigy can actually appear in such a remote place. How rare! Wang Feng and the others whispered among themselves. In front of Lien Shuerong, they didn't dare to be impudent at all. It was as if this wasn't a seductive beauty with bone-deep beauty, but rather a powerful beast of the primitive age. Lien Shuerong also nodded slightly. This kind of young man was truly outstanding, and could be called a prodigy. Peng, peng, peng. Zhao Qi didn't receive any new commands from Lien Shuerong, so he naturally wouldn't step back. He dashed forward like a panther, launching fierce attacks at Ling Han. His attacks were erratic and unpredictable, and he could attack from all kinds of tricky angles. It was almost impossible to defend against. Ling Han mainly focused on defense. A 9 meridians was really at too much of a disadvantage against a 10 meridians. Thankfully, a 10 meridians could only release their power for around 3 feet or so. In other words, Zhao Qi had to be very close to him to be able to launch a threatening attack. In this way, it also gave Ling Han the space to counterattack. It was only 3 feet. His legs exploded with full power, and he could rapidly approach, which similarly posed a great threat to Zhao Qi. A 9 meridians were truly battling against a 10 meridians. It wasn't long before the two of them had already exchanged several dozen blows. Lien Shuerong withdrew her gaze and looked at Sun Jianfang and the others. 10 minutes is up. What's your choice? We are willing to surrender. Gutang, Higuan, and the other elders immediately bowed. It was not just these few elders from the ancient Tao sect. The Divine Wind sect, Blue Feather City, Netherworld faction, and so on had all chosen to surrender, all those that were not 12 meridians. If they followed this dark North nation, it seemed like their future would be bright. A 10 meridians in his teens, a 12 meridians in his 30s. This was practically a myth. Moreover, they were too strong. For example, Chao Tsong and Meng Ruining were both 12 meridians, but in a one-on-one situation, they were completely no match. Thus, it was better to be a smart person and go with the flow. What decision have you all made? Lien Shuerong looked towards Sun Jianfang, Ji Yuanlong, and the few others. Sun Jianfang sighed internally. He had operated the ancient Tao sect for close to 100 years, yet he was actually no match for one word from Lien Shuerong. This made him feel slightly disheartened. His lifespan was nearing its end, so there was actually nothing he couldn't let go of. However, the ancient Tao sect was connected to his blood and sweat, and he hoped that it could become even better in the future. That was why he held on to power and refused to let go. It was only when Ling Han appeared that he finally found someone he thought could help him shoulder his burden. He planned to step down after Ling Han advanced into 10 meridians. Unexpectedly, the change came so quickly. If I don't surrender? Sun Jianfang asked. All lands under the heavens belong to the emperor. Lien Shuerong said calmly. The meaning of these words was very clear. If Sun Jianfang still wanted to stay in the ancient Tao sect, he would definitely have to submit to the rule of the Dark North Nation. In front of royal authority, no one could be an exception. Otherwise, you can leave. If you are not a citizen of the Dark North Nation, then you naturally do not have to abide by the laws of the Dark North Nation. Hee. I would like to spar a few moves with Banner Lord Lien. Sun Jianfang looked towards Lien Shuerong, fighting spirit blazing in his eyes. Wang Feng. Lien Shuerong answered calmly. Yes, Banner Lord. Wang Feng immediately stepped out. If you want to fight with my Banner Lord, you have to get through me first. Old Venom, Meng Ruining, and the other 12 Meridians elites all looked at Sun Jianfang. They naturally didn't want to surrender the force that they had operated for so many years, but in front of absolute strength, what could they do? Sun Jianfang smiled faintly. You're no match for me. Haha. Shameless boasting. Wang Feng shouted loudly and charged towards Sun Jianfang. His strength had reached 50,000 kilograms, and he burst out with his full strength. As he rushed over, it was as if he was a herd of wild bulls running madly. Sun Jianfang stood with his hands clasped behind his back. When Wang Feng was about 15 meters away from him, he waved his hand. Go! Wang Feng also roared loudly. As he shot out a punch, the 5 overlapping layers of power were superimposed. Visibly, even the air itself was rippling, as if it was wrinkling. He pushed this powerful force onwards. 12 meridians could release their power to about 6 meters, so the present distance was still a little short of that. Boom! Sun Jianfang shot out a palm strike, and Wang Feng was sent flying. What? Wang Feng's strength had already been proven. He was a supreme king tier of 12 meridians, and he had even cultivated 5 overlapping layers of power. Logically speaking, if one could send him flying, it would have to be 12 meridians as well who had cultivated 6 overlapping layers of power, or even more. Sun Jianfang was undoubtedly a 12 meridians. In other words, he had cultivated 6 or 7 overlapping layers of power. Hiss, what ancient secret technique had he obtained? Sun Jianfang crossed his arms behind his back and said, "Now, do I have the right to ask for some guidance?" As the mountain winds blew, his robes fluttered, and he had an indescribable air of ease. Even if he was facing a group of powerful enemies, and even if he was targeted by terrifying arrows, so what? Cultivators were unyielding. Ji Yuanlong and the other 12 meridians king tiers all felt admiration from the bottom of their hearts. They knew that a large part of the reason why Sun Jianfang dared to step out like this was because he did not have much lifespan left. At most, he could live for another 10 years. Hence, he was willing to go all out, and did not hesitate to have a vigorous battle to end his legendary life in glory. However, it was the same for them, but none of them dared to step out. In comparison, Sun Jianfang stood out. Ah! Wang Feng roared in fury as he charged back from the distance. This attack caused blood to seep from the corners of his lips, but it seemed to have incited his vicious nature, and his face was filled with killing intent. Step back. Lian Shuerong's eyes lit up. You are no match for him. Captain. Wang Feng was unwilling to give up. Although he had suffered a loss in a single strike, he believed that he could still win with his superior technique. And Lian Shuerong's beautiful eyes glared, and a murderous aura spread out. Yes. Wang Feng obediently stepped aside. A dignified 12 meridians supreme king tier actually didn't have much of a temper. This woman, just how strong was she? Lian Shuerong looked at Sun Jianfang, nodded, and showed an expression of approval. In this desolate land, you can actually rely on your own efforts to advance into the blood transformation tier. It's really not easy. When these words fell, everyone was shocked. What? Sun Jianfang had already stepped into another cultivation level. No wonder he could send Wang Feng flying with a single palm strike. If he had advanced into a new major tier, then what would it matter if his opponent was a king tier of 12 meridians? Blood transformation tier? Sun Jianfang also revealed a blank expression, as if he didn't understand at all. Lian Shuerong shook her head and said, "As expected, you only explored on your own and opened the door to the next cultivation level. However, you don't understand and have gone through who knows how many twists and turns in the process of cultivation. You must have suffered countless hidden injuries and suffered great losses." She paused for a moment before continuing. Others can obtain an additional 30 years or so of lifespan after reaching the blood transformation tier. However, you've suffered far too many losses. At most, you can only obtain a lifespan of 10 years. Sun Jianfang's expression tensed up at first, then he revealed a carefree expression. Who can avoid death when they're alive? I've been unhindered all my life and founded the ancient Dao sect, and relied on my own abilities to advance to a new cultivation level. What regrets would I have even if I die? His name was destined to remain in the annals of history and become a legend on the path of martial arts. It was already enough for him to have reached this point in his life. Oh, you think your accomplishments are very extraordinary? Lian Shuerong smiled faintly. Old man, you have been a frog at the bottom of a well for too long. She leaped out, as agile as a cheetah, and pressed her palm down on Sun Jianfang. Pong! She was still extremely far away, yet her power had already reached him. Sun Jianfang hurriedly raised his fist to parry. This was the 4 directional fists. In this exchange of blows, the two of them were separated by at least 15 meters, but the force had already clashed fiercely, as if it had solidified. Sun Jianfang's figure swayed, and he couldn't help but take a few steps back. Then he trembled again and took another 10 steps back. After stopping, he took another 10 steps back, and then another 10 steps back. In this manner, he took more than 100 steps back before finally stopping. Everyone was transfixed with shock. Fuck. This woman's strength was far too heaven-defying. Sun Jianfang was already awesome enough, sending Wang Feng, who was at 12 meridians, flying with a single slap. However, faced with this woman, he retreated more than 100 steps with a single strike. Moreover, he stopped, retreated, and stopped again. What did this signify? Lian Shuerong's attack not only crushed Sun Jianfang in terms of power, but also formed a dozen overlapping layers of power, and only then could she have suppressed Sun Jianfang in waves. She was too strong. She alone was enough to sweep aside all opposition in the world. No wonder so many 12 Meridians elites were willing to submit to her. He Guan, Gu Tang, and the others, on the other hand, became energetic, raising their heads and puffing out their chests. As the saying went, smart birds would choose a tree to perch on. They were the smart people here and had made the most correct choice. Moreover, if a banner lord was already so awesome, then how strong would the lord of Huju City be? And how strong would the sovereign of the Black North Nation be? Only with such a powerful backer would there be boundless brilliance. Just listen, what did Lian Shuerong say just now? If one advanced to the blood transformation tier, they would be able to obtain an additional 30 years of lifespan. That was 30 years. Especially for Ji Yuanlong and the others, they were all restless. Which of them wasn't nearing the limit of their lifespan? It was possible that they would sleep at night and not be able to get up the next day. Who didn't want to live for a few more years? Sun Jianfang's expression changed drastically. He had never imagined that he, who had pushed open the door to a new cultivation level, would be inferior to a woman in her 20s. This dark North Nation or whatnot was a little too powerful, wasn't it? Old man, in the desolate plains, you managed to step into the blood transformation tier with your own exploration. This is truly extraordinary. Hence, I am willing to give you a chance. Join our empire, and not only will I heal the life force that you have lost, I can even help you step into a higher cultivation level, Lian Shuerong said calmly. Was there a higher cultivation level than the blood transformation tier? Everyone's hearts thumped wildly. This was really a temptation that could not be refused. Stronger strength, more lifespan, what better choice could a cultivator make than this? Sun Jianfang sighed. Previously, he had thought of himself as a legend, but hearing Lian Shuerong's words, this little achievement of his was really nothing. Just how many blood transformation tier elites were there in their city? His heart had already wavered. However, he still couldn't just discard his pride. So he stood there without saying anything. Meng Ruining walked over and said, "Big brother Sun, come on. Water naturally flows downhill, and we're all naturally aiming for greater heights." He had already made up his mind. Moreover, with the terrifying abilities of Lian Shuerong and the others, there was actually no need for them to be so polite. They could completely force their way through, and who would be able to stop them? With this thought, the conflict and grievance in his heart naturally decreased slightly. Sun Jianfang nodded. He looked at Lian Shuerong and said, "I can surrender, but there's one thing that has to be made clear. That demonic snake was indeed killed by one of our disciples." "I believe you," Lian Shuerong said, glancing at Sima Rong. Sima Rong's body instantly trembled, and he couldn't help but shiver. Although Lian Shuerong still hadn't reprimanded him yet, he knew that this banner lord couldn't tolerate faults. He actually dared to deceive her, so he definitely wouldn't have a good ending. The outcome of the battle here was already set in stone. But on the other side, there was still a fierce battle raging on. Although Zhao Qi was only 16 or 17 years old, his battle experience was extremely abundant. Moreover, he could release his power, and with the compounding of the 5 overlapping layers of power, his battle prowess was incredibly powerful. Ling Han mainly focused on defense, waiting for an opportunity to counterattack, and his true motive was to wait until Zhao Qi had used up all his power. At that time, It would be him blowing the horn to signal the beginning of his counterattack. Zhao Qi was young and rash, so how could he compare to Ling Han, a veteran who had fought countless battles in the Genesis world? If a 10 Meridians went all out, they would only be able to battle for about 2 hours, and with the extravagant use of 5 overlapping layers of power, this had to be further divided into 5. Thus, after half an hour, Zhao Qi's power began to decline. His stamina was astonishing, and his breathing wasn't heavy. However, the mystical power in his body had been expended too much, and even the distance he could release it over had shrunk to about a foot. That's all. Ling Han released a battle cry and counterattacked with all his might. Pung, pung, pung. He aggressively charged forward. In just 3 punches and 2 kicks, Zhao Qi was sent flying. And this was still because he had not used the demonic monkey fists. Otherwise, he would have long since defeated his opponent. It was necessary to hide one's strength. Whether it was the demonic monkey fists or the brother monkey cultivation technique, they were both too important. Lian Xuerong opened her mouth and said, "Little Qi, come back." Zhao Qi got up and rubbed his chest, showing a pained expression. He obediently walked back, and there was no hatred in the gaze he directed at Ling Han. Instead, it was filled with admiration. Not only him, but even Wang Feng and the others were no exception. Warriors like them had the greatest admiration for those who were truly good at fighting. Ling Han had defeated Zhao Qi, a 10 Meridians elite, with his cultivation level of 9 Meridians. In their eyes, he was definitely even more astonishing than Sun Jianfang, who had cultivated to the blood transformation tier. After all, if it was in Huju City, although there weren't blood transformation tier elites all over the city, there were still many of them. However, for a 9 Meridians to defeat a 10 Meridians, there were pitifully few, and they definitely could be ranked in the top 10. Lian Xuerong nodded at Ling Han and said, "Now, I believe that you were the one who killed that python. However, I didn't make a promise with you, that whoever kills this python will have the volcanic fruit." Ling Han frowned upon hearing this. What did this woman mean? "I still have an empty position of deputy captain here. Are you willing to work for me?" Lian Xuerong spoke up. When these words fell, even Wang Feng and the others were surprised. There were a total of 10 teams under the Xianxia banner, and every team had a captain, followed by a deputy captain. Wang Feng and the elites of 12 Meridians were all captains. However, if one wanted to become the deputy captain, they would have to be in 11 Meridians at the very least. Ling Han hadn't even advanced to the 10 Meridians yet. Even if he had the ability of a 10 Meridians in the Xianxia banner, he really couldn't be considered an elite. This time, he had been exceptionally promoted. However, Lian Xuerong's rule was extremely strict, so Wang Feng and the others didn't dare to say anything. Meanwhile, He Guan and the others looked jealous. Fuck. They had long since chosen their side, but it seemed like they weren't even qualified to join the Xianxia banner. Ling Han, on the other hand, only went through a fight, and he had become the deputy captain. Didn't this mean that seniors like them would have to submit to Ling Han? They were naturally all defiant and displeased. Thoughts streaked through Ling Han's mind. If he stayed in the ancient Dao sect, his cultivation would come to an end at the 12 Meridians. Sun Jianfang had explored for so many years before finally advancing into the blood transformation tier, and he had paid a huge price in this process. Even if his talent was outstanding, and the time he needed to become a blood transformation tier was far less than Sun Jianfang, without anyone to guide him, this time would still be very long. Following the path of their predecessors and walking out a path for themselves were two completely different things. Moreover, the Dark North Nation seemed to have already walked very far on the path of martial arts. For example, if a Banner Lord was a blood transformation tier elite, then wouldn't the City Lord have to be a level higher, and what cultivation level did the Emperor have? The ancient Dao sect was really too small. The so-called prodigy was only someone like Li Changdan. There was no meaning to stepping on him. Ling Han still wanted to study formations and alchemy. It seemed like this could only be realized if he went to the Dark North Nation. He came to a decision, clasped his hands and said, "Many thanks to Banner Lord for your kind offer." Humph! His attitude incited the displeasure of Wang Feng and the others. When captains like them saw Lian Xuerong, They even had to half kneel down to pay their respects, and you just clasped your hands in greeting. You really think too highly of yourself, don't you? Lien Shuerong didn't care. She ran her fingers through her silky hair. This kind of young man with personality was what she admired more. What was the point of being too accommodating and servile? However, her interest was also to wear down the thorns in these young people's personalities, so that they would listen obediently. I'll bestow this volcanic fruit on you. Go and retrieve it yourself, she said lazily. Lien Shuerong okayed towards the masses again. I will give you a month's time to deal with trivial matters. After a month, your forces will come under the territory of the Dark North Nation, and the flag of the Dark North Nation will be planted, worshipping my master as his majesty. Understood. Ji Yuanlong and the others replied with a bow. This was a great elite of the blood transformation tier. Aside from Sun Jianfang, who could just barely be considered as an equal, the others could only obey. Another group of people jumped down from the battleship. Each force would be assigned one person, and they would coordinate the process of submitting. After all, submitting to the Dark North Nation wasn't something as simple as just raising a flag. Old man, let's discuss together, Lien Shuerong said to Sun Jianfang with a smile, appearing very polite. Even in Huju City, a blood transformation tier cultivator could be called an elite cultivator. Moreover, Sun Jianfang had broken through to this cultivation level by himself. There was nothing to be said about his talent and determination. Thus, she gave him a lot of faith. If he could survive the loss of life force which resulted in the depletion of his lifespan, perhaps he would have even greater potential for development in the future. Sun Jianfang nodded. She admired Ling Han, which made him feel very pleased. He had no children, and he was already feeling slightly like he was treating Ling Han as his descendant. Please. He also became polite. The two of them boarded the battleship to discuss martial arts, while He Guan, Gu Tang and the others brought a Xianxia banner warrior back to ancient Dao sect to deal with the specific matters of surrender and submission. Brother! Wang Feng and the others all gathered around him. It was as if they had seen a monster, and they all stared at Ling Han. It's over, you're really done for. That's right. There isn't a man that our banner lord admires that has come out unscathed. Sai, you should pray for good fortune. Ling Han laughed in spite of himself. Banner Lord Lien is that terrifying? How could she not be? A bald man said. Even though our banner lord is so dazzlingly beautiful and charming, she's actually as cold as ice in her bones. She's a demon. In the past, there was a captain who took advantage of the fact that he was a relative of the city lord, and took advantage of his drunken mood to speak cheekily to the banner lord, and guess what happened in the end? His mouth was forcibly smashed, and his lower half had also been sliced off. He ended up being neither male nor female. Ling Han said, that person probably brought this upon himself. You don't understand. Our banner Lord Lien is a two-faced person. Right now, she's as cold as a block of ice, but after a few days, she can be as passionate as fire and melt you down. However, if you dare to show even the slightest bit of hee you understand, then just wait to be taught a lesson, Wang Feng said with lingering fear. Ling Han looked at these 9 people and asked, have you all suffered like that before? Sigh. The 12 Meridians King Tears all sighed. Who would not times when they had misbehaved? A large man in green said. It was no wonder that, when these people had followed Lien Shuerong off the battleship, they were all as obedient as children. As it turned out, they had all been harshly taught a lesson, leaving behind a strong psychological scar on them. He really couldn't tell that this aloof woman had a side to her that was as beautiful as peach flowers? Additionally, welcome, brother, to join our Xianxia banner. Wang Feng opened his arms to Ling Han and hugged him tightly. The others all stepped forward to embrace Ling Han. They then introduced themselves. These people were actually very simple and sincere, causing Ling Han to slowly change his mindset. Originally, he had hated these people very much. As for Sima Rong, he was in a miserable state. Though Lien Shuerong didn't reprimand him, everyone knew that their banner lord hated being deceived the most. She didn't flare up now because Lien Shuerong held Sun Jianfang in high regard and could not spare the time to punish him now. In the first place, the warriors all looked down on bootlickers like Sima Rong. Naturally, no one wanted to plead on his behalf. They only treated him as empty air, just passing him by, and did not even cast a second look at him. Sima Rong was despondent. He had been assigned a mission when he returned to Blue Feather City this time, acting as a pawn and scout, mainly to find out about the outstanding talents of the various forces. And what happened in the end? There was obviously a super genius like Ling Han, but because of his jealousy he had almost been buried. How could Lien Shuerong spare him? Flee. He thought to himself that nothing good would happen if he stayed, and he was already a king tier of 10 meridians, so where couldn't he go? However, just as he was about to descend the mountain, he saw the bald man block his path with a grin. Where do you think you're going? This was an elite of 12 meridians. Sima Rong flopped onto the ground. He couldn't run away even if he wanted to, so he could only wait for punishment in fear. Ling Han didn't immediately dive into the pool. The water was still filled with strong poison, and even a 10 meridians demonic beast couldn't withstand it. If he jumped in like this, it was very likely that he wouldn't be able to come out again. It would be better to wait. In any case, the battleship would only be started a month later and return to Huju City. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ling Han asked Wang Feng and the others for guidance, and gained a good understanding of the Dark North Nation. The Dark North Nation originated from the extreme north of the celestial sea planet. After the drastic changes in heaven and earth, it rapidly rose up, and soon swept aside all opposition, continuously expanding its territory. Why was the ancient Tao sect completely unaware of the existence of such a colossal force? It was very simple because after the great change of heaven and earth, the wilderness was filled with demonic beasts, and the communication devices were also broken. People could not walk too far, and what they knew and heard was limited. It was only now that the expansion of the Dark North Nation had reached them that they suddenly realized that there was actually such an incomparably powerful force outside. The emperor of the Dark North Nation was surnamed Chun, but no one knew his name. This was an honorific, and ordinary people were not qualified to know. And what cultivation level the emperor of the Dark North Nation was at was even more unknown. In any case, he was the number 1 elite of the Dark North Nation, and it was highly possible that he was also the number 1 elite of the Celestial Sea Planet. Wang Feng and the others actually didn't know much either. They were only in their 30s now, and had been born and grew up in Huju City. Afterwards, they practiced martial arts, and joined the army in order to get by. Afterwards, after a lot of screening, they finally joined the Xianxia banner. There were about 10,000 people in the ordinary army of Huju City, and the most outstanding people would be chosen to join the special teams of Xianxia, Dihuang, Tianhua, and Yunma. Any one member of these teams would be a king tier of 10 meridians. Their mission was basically to eliminate the demonic beasts within the borders of the nation. This kind of recruitment mission was only done occasionally, and was not much different from a holiday to them. Sun Jianfang soon came out, his face filled with excitement. He called Ling Han over, and seriously advised Ling Han to let go of everything that belonged to the ancient Tao sect. Compared to the greatness of the Dark North Nation, it really wasn't worth mentioning. The old geezer's attitude changed so quickly. Ling Han, on the other hand, didn't care much. He had only entered the ancient Tao sect for a few months, so it was naturally impossible for him to have any sense of belonging. He only thought that Sun Jianfang was worthy of respect, considered Nieyang a friend, and gained a little maid. Previously, he had asked Nieyang for a favor. When he returned, he would inform Huan Shui that she would come over with the soldier that was heading to the ancient Tao sect. After staying for a few days, the poison in the pool finally dissipated. Ling Han leaped into the pool to see if the volcanic fruit had ripened. The moment he fell into the water, he immediately shivered. It was really cold, almost freezing his blood. He hurriedly channeled the brother monkey cultivation technique. Instantly, a heat circulated in his body, dispelling a portion of the coldness. It was still very cold, but it was finally tolerable. He dived to the bottom of the pool, and the water pressure rapidly increased. Thankfully, the volcanic fruit was growing on the cave wall that was about 30 meters deep in the pool. The water pressure at this position was nothing to Ling Han. It hadn't matured completely yet, and it would probably take another 5 days. Then let's just wait. Ling Han floated to the surface. Voila, water splashed in all directions. He suddenly discovered that even Lian Xuerong was actually at the side of the pool, and this liquid instantly sprayed towards her. Wang. This beauty raised her hand, and instantly, an invisible wall formed around her, blocking the liquid. Apologies, I didn't see Banner Lord, Ling Han said apologetically. Lian Xuerong was not an unreasonable person. She was not angered, but rather threw out a book and said, "This is a cultivation technique created by His Imperial Majesty, the Shenhuang technique. I will now bestow you with the opportunity to cultivate this technique. If there is anything you do not understand, you can come and find me at any time." Sure enough, proper forces all had cultivation techniques. Otherwise, relying on fist techniques to absorb the mystical power of heaven and earth was really too inefficient. Ling Han accepted the cultivation technique, and Lian Xuerong turned around and left. Sima Rong knelt at the side, so jealous that flames were about to burst from his eyes. He had traveled the world a few years ago, and coincidentally, when he was battling fiercely with a demonic beast, he was rescued by Lian Xuerong's team. He stayed with this team for a period of time, and received some benefits which allowed him to advance into 10 meridians. Afterwards, he was ordered by Lian Xuerong to return to carry out his mission. However, after so long, he had never been taught any cultivation technique. This damn brat stole everything from him. Sima Rong gritted his teeth. He had been punished to kneel here for a month, but 10 days had not even passed, and he already felt like he could not hold on any longer. If looks could kill, then Ling Han would definitely have been killed by him many times over. Ling Han cast a glance at Sima Rong, but was completely unconcerned. He followed her and said, "Banner Lord." "What is it?" Lian Xuerong stopped in her tracks, a sliver of coldness in their eyes. If Ling Han pushed his luck and made some unreasonable demands, then she would teach Ling Han a good lesson. "Does Banner Lord possess any information about formations?" Ling Han asked. Lian Xuerong was astonished. She hadn't imagined that Ling Han would make such a request of her. "What is it? You still want to study formations?" She turned around and asked. Ling Han nodded earnestly. Lian Xuerong shook her head. "Do you know how many cultivators there are in the Dark North Nation?" "No," Ling Han answered very decisively. "Although there are no exact numbers, there should be no less than 100,000 people of 6 meridians and above," Lian Xuerong said. She paused, then asked, "And in the case of formation masters, how many are there?" "I don't know." Ling Han still shook his head. "Not counting apprentices, there are only a mere 100 people that are truly qualified to be called formation masters." Ling Han understood what Lian Xuerong's words meant. That was, formation masters were extremely rare, and there were extremely high requirements to become one. It was not something that could be achieved just by anyone studying formations. However, what she didn't know was that after absorbing all the essence of the divine stone, he was born with outstanding talent in formations and alchemy, and heaven-defying luck and affinity. He merely smiled. "I only want to try and see if I have the talent in this area." Lian Xuerong was slightly displeased. To be so biting off more than one can chew, and be so impractical, how could one possibly walk further on the path of martial arts? "Do you think you are that young Master Wuk who had fluttering white robes and was renowned throughout the world, capable of easily cultivating both martial arts and formations?" When she thought of that flawlessly perfect man, she couldn't help but blush, her eyes a little dazed. Among all the women in the world, who did not think of him as their dream lover? She hurriedly came back to her senses. She was the Banner Lord of Shenqing Banner, so how could she lose her composure in front of her subordinates? "You wait for a while." Lian Xuerong returned to the battleship, and very soon came out again. She tossed another book to Ling Han. "This is a chapter of basics about formations. Take it and comprehend it on your own." Additionally, 3 days later, I will test your grasp of formations. If you can't satisfy me, humph. She waved her hand and left. Ling Han chuckled. All right, then let's take a look at the cultivation technique created by the nation leader of Dark North Nation. He first looked at the Shenhuang technique and read it word by word. Occasionally, he would let out an "oh." Very quickly, he closed the book and closed his eyes to recall. It had to be admitted that this nation leader was really a prodigy of martial arts. The prerequisite of that was that this cultivation technique was really created by him. Couldn't compare to Brother Monkey cultivation technique. However, compared to using the 4 directional fists to cultivate, this was still several times better. As for the details, he would only know after trying it out. Early in the morning of the second day, Ling Han used this cultivation technique to cultivate. He discovered that compared with Brother Monkey cultivation technique, this was only 1/10 of the efficiency. Moreover, there were many impurities in the power refined through this technique, and compared with the power in his body, the difference was clear. And this cultivation technique could be given to the little handmaiden to cultivate. Ling Han nodded, stopped cultivating this cultivation technique, and began using the Brother Monkey cultivation technique again. According to his estimation, without any special help, he would need around 100 days to be able to step into 10 meridians. This wasn't slow at all, but Ling Han hoped that it could be faster, because he wanted to release the Empress and the others as soon as possible. He believed that this was related to his strength. Once he became stronger, the Empress and the others would naturally be able to come out. Half an hour later, Ling Han took out the basics of formations and began to study it. This was really the basics, starting from explaining what formations were. What were formations? Extracting and turning around the power of heaven and earth to confuse, destroy enemies, and refine pills. Thus, formation masters also had a branch called formation alchemists. They specialized in alchemy, and formations was only supplementary to their main specialization. Aside from the most basic formations such as 3 elements formation and the like, the creation of other formation foundations requires learning formation patterns, as well as powerful spiritual power as a medium to communicate with heaven and earth. Spiritual power? In the Genesis world, my divine sense is extremely strong. But now, where do I find spiritual power? In other words, if I want to learn formations, I have to first learn how to strengthen my spiritual power, or how to instill spiritual power into formation patterns. I wonder if there is such a cultivation technique in the Dark North Nation. I'll start learning from the most basic formation patterns first. 3,600 basic formation patterns, 1,800 medium-level formation patterns, 108 high-level formation patterns, and 36 extremely effective formation patterns. However, only 744 basic formation patterns are used here. The combination of different formation patterns can have different effects. I wonder what level the formation patterns on the formation foundations dug out in the ancient Tao sect's ancient formation are. I've already had Huan Shui bring it over. I'll study it when the time comes. He began to learn formation patterns, and instantly fell into a state of neglecting food and rest. He even forgot to eat and sleep, and the most important thing of the morning, cultivation. These formation patterns were incredibly complex. They were obviously only basic formation patterns, but their complexity made Ling Han feel as if he was cultivating an incredibly profound martial arts technique. Moreover, there seemed to be a mystical power in the world that was causing trouble. Every time he memorized a formation pattern, it would immediately begin to fade, as if it was about to be erased from his memory. This caused his progress to become incredibly slow. He couldn't even remember them, so how could he talk about creating formation foundations? Ling Han! Ling Han! Ling Han was interrupted by a fierce knock on the door. He was now on the battleship and had a single room that belonged to him. He came back to his senses, and suddenly felt both hungry and thirsty. "The Banner Lord wants to see you," the person outside said. Ling Han faltered upon hearing this. Could it be that 3 days had already passed? So fast. No wonder he felt so thirsty. He went out to meet Lien Shuerong. "How's the study of the cultivation technique going?" Lien Shuerong asked. "I've learnt it." Ling Han nodded. Lian Shuerong was drinking tea, and when she heard this, almost spat it out. What kind of joke was this? He had learnt this cultivation technique in 3 days? Keep bragging. All right, I'll test you. She began to test Ling Han, but as questions were thrown out and perfectly answered, she couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression. There really were prodigies in the world. For example, the incomparably talented young Master Wuk from the Dark North Nation. It was said that he would be able to learn anything at first glance, and others could only admire him. Was this young man in front of her also such a prodigy? Go on, work hard on cultivation, and don't neglect it, she said. Because she was too stunned, she had forgotten to ask Ling Han how he was doing in formations, but as she saw it, it was already remarkable for Ling Han to be able to fully comprehend this cultivation technique in 3 days. So how could he possibly have the time to spend on formations? Even if she asked, it would be pointless. 2 days later, Ling Han dived into the pool again and plucked the volcanic fruit. This was already completely mature. A volcanic fruit could instantly turn a 9 meridians martial artist into a 10 meridians martial artist. Ling Han couldn't wait. He was filled with longing for 10 meridians. When he released his power, his battle prowess would instantly advance to a new height. It wasn't impossible for him to battle even a 12 meridians. He sat down in a cross-legged position and began to gnaw on the volcanic fruit. And it was very fragrant. Though it was not very sweet, it was not too bad, at least. Ling Han made his evaluation, and it was practically in an instant that power surged within his body. The volcanic fruit's medicinal effects took effect. Ling Han guided the effects, circulating it within his body. Boom! His 9th meridian was rapidly widening at an extremely intense pace. Logically speaking, this volcanic fruit should have been taken when at the peak stage of 9 meridians. In this way, the powerful medicinal effects could be used to open up the next meridian. Otherwise, because this step was the most difficult, it was very likely that as the medicinal effects took effect, the subsequent effects would no longer be enough to open up the 10th meridian. Ling Han didn't care about this. All he wanted was to break through to the peak stage of 9 meridians. Even if the medicinal effects were exhausted, and he was still unable to break through to 10 meridians, he would only have to wait until the next morning to cultivate again. He would definitely be able to push open the doors to the 10 meridians then. He was filled with confidence about this. His 9th meridian was rapidly expanding. This had long since been opened, but it was still far from widening to the extreme. The medicinal effects were so fierce. Ling Han thought internally. At present, it was as if there was a primitive beast hidden in his body that was endlessly barraging him, making him feel as if his body was about to explode. However, the fiercer the medicinal effects, the faster his cultivation level would increase. Under the repeated impact, his 9th meridian quickly expanded to the extreme, giving rise to a powerful pain. It's done, he thought to himself, and began to grope around for the 10th meridian. The power in Ling Han's body was a tentacle, but this power was too violent and not gentle, causing Ling Han to be very injured, coughing up blood continuously. Thankfully, not even a minute had passed, and Ling Han had already found the 10th meridian. Boom, his power had a new vent, and immediately surged in incredibly violently. Come, come. Ling Han was as steady as a boulder, absorbing this energy and guiding it towards the 10th meridian. Boom, the 10th meridian was forcibly opened up. This was Hand Yangming large intestine meridian, and it started from the index finger of the left hand, and finally ended below the left eye. It wasn't enough that it had been opened. The medicinal effects of the volcanic fruit hadn't completely dissipated yet, and after several more attempts, it finally came to an end. Ling Han stood up, filled with anticipation. He was now at 10 meridians and could release his power. With a thought, power surged in all 10 meridians, converging and fusing, forming some kind of qualitative change that could not be described with words. Ling Han raised his right hand and pressed it forwards. Pooh! A lamp placed on the table immediately collapsed. Success! Ling Han smiled faintly. However, he didn't dare to use too much strength in the room, so he walked out. There was a combat chamber on the bottom floor of the ship, and there was a strength tester inside. He had long since found out about this. He arrived only to see 5 men sparring. The youngest was only 20 years old, while the oldest was around 30 years old. They were all 10 meridians. When they saw Ling Han, 2 younger men immediately nodded at Ling Han and said, "Deputy Captain Ling." The other 3 men were much more arrogant and acted like they did not see him. Ling Han was suddenly appointed as deputy captain by Lien Shuerong. This naturally made a great many veteran team members displeased. What right did 9 meridians have to surpass and rule over them? They didn't dare to protest to Lien Shuerong. However, there was no way they would show Ling Han any respect either. In fact, they were filled with animosity toward him. Ling Han smiled and nodded at the 2 people who had greeted him. As for the other 3, he had no plans to pay them any attention for the moment. He only had to show off his abilities, and what problem would not be dealt with. Seeing that Ling Han did not make any move, and merely walked past them, the 3 soldiers with heavy animosity instantly looked disdainful. He was just a coward. He did not even dare to show a temper in the face of such provocation, so how could he be worthy of being their deputy captain? I really am unconvinced. A mere 9 meridians can actually become our deputy captain. It should be known that the lowest requirement for entering into the Xianxia banner is 10 meridians. What kind of bootlicking has this brat done to the banner lord? Hee. Wouldn't you know after challenging him? That's true. If we beat him up, this brat should retreat in the face of difficulties and ask for his own resignation from the banner lord. Which of our captains didn't obtain their positions with the force of their fists? This guy wants to test his strength. We'll wait for him to finish testing his strength, and then seek him out for a challenge. The 5 of them stopped sparring and walked over. Ling Han arrived in front of the strength tested. He stood 3 feet away from it. Ordinarily, this was the greatest attack range of a 10 meridians king tier. All right, come. He did not channel any kind of technique, and merely shot out a punch. Pong! His fist clearly hadn't landed on the strength testing device, yet the surging power of the punch still surged forward and slammed into it. On the strength tester, the numbers flashed continuously and finally stopped. Fuck! My eyes must have blurred. How is this possible? Fuck you. On the strength tester, the number 45,500 kilograms was extremely eye-catching. A 10 meridians limit was only 25,000 kilograms of strength, while a 11 meridians limit was also 35,000 kilograms. There were indeed prodigies who could break through this limit, but a 10 meridians highest record was 30,000 kilograms of strength, while an 11 meridians highest record was 40,000 kilograms. 45,500 kilograms of strength. This was almost reaching the limit of 12 meridians. Ling Han must have broken through. Otherwise, he would not have been able to release his power. This was the effect of the volcanic fruit. However, Ling Han should have just broken through, and thus possessed power that was close to the limit of 12 meridians. How could this be believed? Hey! Didn't you say you wanted to challenge this new deputy captain? Someone nudged the soldier who had previously said he wanted to challenge Ling Han. The soldier grimaced upon hearing this. How he wished he could dig a hole and bury himself in it. Though he was also a 10 meridians, his power was only 25,000 kilograms. Compared to Ling Han, this gap was close to double. The only result of challenging him would be seeking his own humiliation. It should be known that in front of absolute power, any kind of technique was completely useless. What a monster! A super monster! To say nothing of becoming a deputy captain, it would not be strange for such a monster to become a captain even. The 5 of them were completely impressed. He was already so strong at 10 meridians, then what about when he advanced to 11 meridians? No. As long as he reached the peak stage of 10 meridians, his power would probably exceed 50,000 kilograms of force. Aside from the distance he could release his force, he would not be inferior to any 12 meridians. Ling Han hesitated for a moment. He discovered that the distance of 3 feet was not the limit of his power. He took a few more steps back and stood 6 feet away, preparing to throw a punch. What does he want to do? Punch from 6 feet away? A 10 meridians power can reach 10 feet at most, But at this distance, the power is almost zero. It's no different from the force of a breeze. What does our new deputy captain want to do? The 5 warriors were all curious. Right at this moment, Ling Han shot out a punch. Pong! The strength tester instantly started operating again. 4 to 46,000 kilograms. Heavens! What is going on here? Not only has his power not weakened, it has instead strengthened. Without channeling any techniques, power will indeed fluctuate. But when a 10 meridians throws a punch from 6 feet away, his power doesn't decrease at all? Am I dreaming? Freak, without a doubt. This guy is a freak. The 5 warriors all looked at Ling Han with reverence. Was this really a human? Ling Han thought for a moment, then took a few steps back. When he was 3 meters away, he then threw another punch. Pong! The strength tester vibrated slightly, and still showed a figure exceeding 45,000 kilograms. On the sidelines, those 5 soldiers were already rendered speechless. Why was it that after one had advanced into 10 meridians, the hierarchy would become extremely clear? It was very simple. A 12 meridians could strike their opponent from a distance of 6 meters away, but a 10 meridians only had an attack range of 3 feet. To say nothing of the fact that there was a power gap in the first place, even if there wasn't with such a far distance, a 10 meridians wouldn't even have the chance to make a move, and would be directly blasted to the ground. This new deputy captain was definitely not human. In the future, no matter what he said, they had to listen obediently. They definitely could not just obey on the surface but disregard him on the side just because his cultivation level was not high. Ling Han retreated again, and after a few more attempts, he finally found out his limits. When he was about 6 meters away, his power would begin to decline. When he was about 6 meters and 1 foot away, his power would be practically zero. In other words, whether it was in terms of power or the distance he could release his power, he was not inferior to a 12 meridians. Awesome! Ling Han was brimming with confidence. Right now, even if he had to battle against 12 meridians elites like Meng Ruining and the other 12 meridians elites of the older generation, he would be unafraid and there was a 90% chance of winning. He turned around and saw that the 5 warriors from before were all gaping widely, looking at him as if they had seen a ghost. Ling Han smiled faintly at them before turning around to leave. Fuck! I'm about to go crazy. Such a powerful 10 meridians elite is practically a monster. No, I want to be transferred to Captain Ling's team. I'll apply too. The eyes of these 5 people lit up. If they followed an elite, they would also be able to benefit from it in future, especially when Ling Han was presently in a weak position. If they followed Ling Han, they would be Ling Han's loyal subjects, veteran brothers and veteran subordinates. Putting them aside, after returning to his own private room, Ling Han began to study compounding overlapping layers of power. The 4 directional fists also had overlapping power, but from the 3 moves that Sun Jianfang had taught him, it could only overlap 2 layers of power, which barely counted. However, among the fist techniques of Brother Monkey Fist technique, the highest power overlap could reach 180 layers. This was terrifying. With a single punch, it was equivalent to having 180 Ling Han's attack at the same time. How many people could withstand it? Ling Han believed that if he really reached such a profound cultivation level, he would be able to crush a blood transformation tier elite into dust with a single punch. Let's give it a try, and see just how many overlapping layers of power I can reach. Ling Han thought internally. Those 180 overlapping layers of power were only theoretically the maximum value. There was an extremely high requirement for the cultivator himself. The first requirement was comprehension. Ling Han did not lack this, but he also needed his physique to keep up, and his power to keep up. Otherwise, if he shot out a punch of 180 overlapping layers of power, his body would first explode, or his strength would be completely unable to keep up, and he would not be able to hold up after shooting out a few dozen overlapping layers of power. This way. No, it should be this way. And that's not right either. Ling Han very quickly left his private room. He disembarked from the battleship and found an empty spot to practice in a dense forest. Demonic monkey fists was extremely important, so it was best not to let outsiders know. He practiced over and over again. If he wanted to use overlapping layers of power, he would have to allow the power in his body to quickly be spat out. There was practically no interval, and only then would he be able to unleash more than a single overlapping layer of power with a single strike. The faster the speed at which he spat out power, the more layers there would be overlapping. Ling Han controlled his power and didn't unleash his full power. Otherwise, the power in his body wouldn't be able to withstand such extravagant use. Moreover, if it really came down to a random barrage, this dense forest would also be destroyed by him. At present, the power he could release had reached about 6 meters, and there was absolutely no need for him to draw close at all. The force of over 45,000 kilograms would already be crushing down on his opponent. This was too terrifying. Pong! He had already cultivated to the point of forgetting everything. All of a sudden, a rock exploded, waking him up from the state of practicing fist techniques. I clearly only used 1,500 kilograms of strength in this punch. Logically speaking, it should be impossible for me to shatter a rock. Unless I've cultivated the power of overlap. Ling Han was pleasantly surprised. He carefully recalled the scene just now, then his arms slowly moved. He suddenly threw a punch. Pong! Another rock was shattered by him. As expected, Ling Han broke into a smile. He had grasped the power of overlap. 2 overlapping layers of power. Taking the first step was the most difficult. Next, it would be the problem of overlapping more layers of power, which would completely depend on the rate at which power surged. Ling Han started to practice again. 3 layers, 4 layers, 5 layers, 9 overlapping layers of power. Ling Han soon reached his current limit. 9 overlapping layers of power superimposed, and then his surge of power couldn't keep up any longer. My body doesn't feel any pressure, and my meridians don't feel any pressure either. This means that it is only my power that can't keep up, but my body hasn't reached its limit. Let's try channeling the Brother Monkey Cultivation technique again? Ling Han channeled the Brother Monkey Cultivation technique before launching another punch. As expected, the speed at which his power surged had increased considerably. It can still be improved. 10th layer, 11th layer, 12th layer, 13th layer. Ling Han had once again reached his limit and could not improve any further. Furthermore, Brother Monkey Cultivation technique can only be channeled for about a minute. Once I surpass this limit, my meridians will be greatly suppressed, as I will feel as if they're about to explode. Thus, under normal circumstances, the overlap of my power would be 9 layers, and under a burst of explosive power, it would be 13 layers. For example, Wang Feng and the others can only attack with 5 overlapping layers of power. Even if I don't explode, 9 overlapping layers of power will still be enough to suppress them. However, there's no benefit in being too high profile. I'll hide my strength. It's fine as long as I can win. He who kept a low profile was actually very proud. Just look, against an elite of 12 meridians, his prerequisite was still winning. I'll ask that Banner Lord Lien if she has any cultivation technique to increase spiritual power. I should start practicing formations. Ling Han went to look for Lien Shuerong again. Have you advanced into 10 meridians? Lien Shuerong allowed him to enter into her boudoir. Even though this was a battleship, her room was not plain and simple in the slightest. She had everything a woman should have, and even had a dressing table. TSK, this cold-faced woman knew how to dress herself up? Ling Han mocked internally, while replying, yes. If one couldn't advance from the 9 meridians to the 10 meridians after ingesting the volcanic fruit, then one could only say that they were too weak. Lien Shuerong didn't find it strange either. She knocked on the table and said, 5 people applied to be transferred to your team. She paused, and said with a faint smile, what spell did you put them under? She knew that her appointment of Ling Han as deputy captain had actually made many people dissatisfied, especially some veteran soldiers. They had all been in Shenqing Banner for 7 to 8 years, but they were still just ordinary soldiers. A young brat who previously only had 9 meridians was suddenly promoted to deputy captain. So how could they be satisfied? But now there were actually 5 people who actively wanted to follow Ling Han, and 3 of them were veteran soldiers. This made her feel curious. Ling Han cracked a smile and said, "Air. I have always used virtue to convince others. Perhaps, when they saw my noble character, they admired me from the depths of their hearts, and that was why they chose to follow me. Just keep talking nonsense." Lian Shuerong rolled her eyes. Lian Shuerong didn't spend much effort on this matter. This matter was insignificant, and she was only curious for a while. "What business do you have with me that you seek an audience with me?" she asked coldly. "Oh," Ling Han nodded. "I would like to ask the Banner Lord if there is any cultivation technique that cultivates spiritual power? What do you want this kind of cultivation technique for?" Lian Shuerong revealed a curious expression. "Isn't this cultivating formations, which requires spiritual power?" Ling Han said. "You've actually learnt it?" Ling Shuerong was truly shocked this time. She had initially thought that Ling Han was biting off more than he could chew, and after studying it for a while, he would give up on it. Yet Ling Han actually asked her for the cultivation technique of spiritual power, which also meant that he really wanted to learn formations. "Hiss, you freak." She shook her head. "There are pitifully few cultivation techniques of spiritual power. They are all grasped in the hands of the formation masters, and would definitely not be taught to outsiders. In other words, unless he became the disciple of these people, it was definitely impossible for him to be taught such a technique." Ling Han couldn't help but feel gloomy. He didn't want to acknowledge anyone as master. Furthermore, there are pitifully few people who can cultivate spiritual power. Lian Shuerong continued, "This requires natural talent. If 1 in 10 people can walk on the path of martial arts, then there may not be 1 in 10,000 who can cultivate spiritual power, and only those who have cultivated spiritual power can take the path of formations." She glanced at Ling Han, changed the topic, and said, "However, if you really want to give it a try, there's a way. Hold on." She began to rummage through her belongings, searching for something. At first, Ling Han wasn't very concerned, but when he occasionally looked at Lian Shuerong, he suddenly felt heat rise up within him. Fuck, this seductive beauty was actually looking for something with her behind raised. The leather cloth tightly wrapped around that shapely bottom, making one burn with heat. Ling Han hurriedly turned his head, murmuring strange inwardly. What kind of temperament did he have? How could he lose his cool so easily? Could it be that, as his cultivation level had been weakened, his self-control had also decreased? After a while, Lian Shuerong finally found what she was looking for. She walked over and threw a disc at Ling Han. It was made of metal, and when it hit the table, a crisp pong sound was heard. This is a tool used by a formation master to select disciples, and is called the Divine Intent Disc. Lian Shuerong explained. Those who have natural talent in this area can use this item to cultivate a shred of spiritual power. Ling Han gave an "oh" and picked up the disc to take a look. It was as thin as a mirror. One side was smooth, and the other side was like a labyrinth, covered with veined patterns. When his eyes focused on it, after a while, he would discover that these veined patterns were actually moving. "I would advise you not to bite off more than you can chew. Although being a formation master is extremely rare and has a high status, attaining that requires natural talent, and it is not something that can be achieved just through your hard work," Lian Shuerong said seriously. "I understand." Ling Han nodded. Lian Shuerong waved her hand dismissively, indicating that Ling Han could leave now. She only had to look at the expression on his face when he answered, and she knew that this guy had not taken her words to heart at all. Forget it. In a few days, when he hit a wall, he would naturally know that martial arts was the only way for him. Just look at the current emperor. His cultivation was exceptional, and his dominance was unmatched in the world. Did he need to cultivate formations as well as a foil for himself? Ling Han brought the disc back with him and began looking at it. Lian Shuerong didn't say what to do specifically, but rather simply staring at it would do. Ling Han stared at it. Those dense veined patterns seemed to have a life of their own and were twisting slightly. Was this a visual side effect caused by staring at it for too long? Ling Han thought internally, but when he channeled the mystical power in his body into his eyes, he still discovered that those veined patterns were moving. No, it's really moving. There should be a small formation set up inside this disc. As he watched, he felt like something in his body had been stimulated, but he could not put his finger on exactly what it was. He shockingly discovered that a small white dot had appeared on the circular disc at some point in time. He stretched out his hand to touch it, yet discovered that it was out of reach. He retracted his hand, and the white dot was still there. This was? An enlightenment came upon Ling Han. Should he use spiritual power to touch it? He tried to push it, but the white dot did not move at all. His determination firmed. Ling Han's interest was piqued. He had a very bad temper, and the more difficult problems he encountered, the more motivated he became. I don't believe that I can't move you. Ling Han tried to use his spiritual power to stimulate this white dot. In the Genesis world, his spiritual power was undoubtedly the number one in the world. Despite now that it had disappeared with the decrease in his own cultivation level, compared to ordinary people, he still knew how to mobilize his spiritual power. However, perhaps he didn't have any spiritual power now, or perhaps his spiritual power was too weak. The white dot didn't move at all. Once Ling Han's temper flared up, he couldn't care about anything else. Aside from eating and drinking, and the fact that he had to cultivate for half an hour every day, he simply held on to this disc as if it was his lover. He did not just stay in his room. Sometimes he would also sit at the bow of the ship or at the side of the pool. As time passed, rumors spread. Hey, do you guys know? The new deputy captain has a crush on the Banner Lord. Isn't that very normal? Our Banner Lord is so beautiful, and her figure is so voluptuous. Who wouldn't like her? This is different. That guy is holding on to the divine intent disc that Banner Lord has given him, and is daydreaming all day. Fuck. Such deep yearning to the point of being engraved to the bones? He's treating the divine intent disc as the Banner Lord. Sigh, what a pitiful guy. He actually fell in love with our Banner Lord. He would be destined to be alone for his whole life. All the warriors thought that Ling Han was madly infatuated with Lien Shuerong, and that was why he had deliberately asked Lien Shuerong for a token, to look at it and think of her. Wang Feng and the others all ran over to comfort Ling Han. They all patted Ling Han's shoulder, looking at him like he needed to pull himself together. There were plenty of fish in the sea, so why did he have to hang on to this one that had spikes? This would cause himself be pierced through with many bloody holes on his entire body. How could Ling Han be in the mood to pay attention to them? He merely held on to the disc, and was filled with such determination in his heart, and the reason being that he was set on pushing this white dot forwards. Wang Feng and the others all shook their heads. Damn, his guy was already so deeply entrenched in shit and could not be pulled out. Sigh, brother. Take care of yourself. Several more days passed, and those who had returned to deal with the trivial matters of the sex all returned. With these mighty figures personally dealing with it, the matter of surrendering naturally went very smoothly. Young master, the little female attendant, was also brought over. When she saw Ling Han at the bow of the ship, she couldn't help but feel delighted. But what was wrong with young master? He was hugging a strange disc, as if it was some kind of treasure, and was completely ignoring her. Hey, are you this guy's female attendant? Wang Feng asked. That's right. Huan Shui puffed up her chest, appearing very proud. Sigh. Better go and persuade your young master. He's about to go crazy, Wang Feng said. What's wrong with young master? Huan Shui couldn't help but become anxious. She grabbed Wang Feng's arm and shook it vigorously. Young master is so pitiful. Huan Shui supported her chin with both hands and looked at Ling Han in a daze. Sigh. Who would have thought that Brother Ling is such a capricious person, to actually go so crazy for love? Please allow me to sing a song in his honor. A tall, thin man said. He was one of the 10 captains, Fu Xiang. Oh, my love. He began to sing, which also caused those around him to cover their ears. This guy was clearly tone-deaf, yet still had a good opinion of himself. He kept thinking that everyone would not appreciate him, and when he had the chance, he would use his singing voice to brainwash them, so that others would accept the fact that he was the god of songs. What are all of you doing here? Lien Shuerong walked onto the deck, a hint of displeasure on her pretty face. This was too outrageous. They were all warriors after all. Everyone hurriedly dispersed, and even the god of song fled in disarray. Ling Xuerong was even referred to as a cold-faced which by them in private. So who wasn't afraid? Set off and return to the empire, Lien Xuerong said coldly. She glanced at Ling Han, and when she saw that he was still hugging that disc, she couldn't help but shake her head. This guy was really too obsessed, wasn't he? Forget it. When he returned to Huju City, she would give him a good training. Then for sure he would not have the time to daydream. The warship shuddered and had already taken flight. Although the warship was very big and could accommodate a great many people, Lien Xuerong didn't bring many back with her. Only the younger generation of various sects and factions. Popal such as He Guan and the older generation were left behind in their original forces. She was not interested in them at all. A 10 meridians in his 70s was really too old. Even if he had cultivated to 12 meridians, so what? Could he still fight? Mystical power would indeed become denser and denser as one's cultivation level deepened, but physical power was the complete opposite. After 70 it would decline, and after 100 a serious deficiency would appear in physical power. Unless one was like Sun Jianfang, who could actually rely on his own trial and error to step into the blood transformation tier. That was a true prodigy. He Guan and the others were naturally displeased. But what could they do? Could it be that they could force Lien Xuerong? That would really be courting death. The warship headed north. The Dark North Nation was located in the extreme north of the Celestial Sea Planet. However, Huju City was located in the southernmost part of the Dark North Nation, and it had only been established for 20+ years. With the warship speed, the journey would only take about half a month. In truth, the warship's speed was not very fast, but its advantage was that it could ignore all obstacles and travel non-stop day and night. Ling Han was still the same as before. Every day he would hold on to the disc, and it was as if eating and sleeping had become his instinct. When it was time, he would eat something, and then lay down to sleep, not caring about anything else. Sigh, how deeply in love. Wang Feng sighed ruefully. I want to sing a song again, Fu Xiang said. When they heard this, everyone hurriedly ran away. Young master, young master. Huan Shui was so anxious that she was almost tearing up. The heaven and earth had changed, and large amounts of wild beasts had evolved into demonic beasts. Not only were there demonic beasts on the ground, but there were also demonic beasts in the skies. There were also behemoths with wings that reached dozens of meters in length, or even over 100 meters in length. On their way, they encountered a few. Thankfully, with the light cannons on board, these demonic beasts did not dare to provoke them. 16 days later, a large black city appeared on the ground ahead of them. There were no tall city walls, and this city was open on all sides with no boundaries. Hiss, how domineering. We're home. Wang Feng and the others all smiled. Their parents, wives, and children were all here. The warship landed somewhere in the city. Boom! The ship shuddered violently. Ling Han suddenly came to his senses. He discovered that the white dot had moved. Was it an illusion, or a misplaced vision caused by a shock? Ling Han picked up the disc again and stared at the white dot. He thought to himself, move upwards. What surprised him was that this white dot had really moved upwards a little. Success, he had managed to cultivate spiritual power. A smile appeared on Ling Han's face, and he breathed a long sigh of relief inwardly. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Without proof, no matter how confident he was, he still felt a little uneasy. Right until this moment, when it was proven that he had really cultivated spiritual power, he naturally became relieved. A strong feeling of weariness assaulted him. Pong! Ling Han fell asleep facing the sky. On the way here, he had only slept for 3 hours a day, and under such accumulation of weariness, he was naturally extremely sleepy. When Ling Han woke up, he discovered that he was already lying on the bed, and this was no longer the warship, but rather a decent bedroom. That's right, he had cultivated spiritual power. Ling Han immediately got up and channeled his spiritual power. In this place, it was also called spiritual power. The moment this spiritual power was being channeled, he realized that it was as if he had an additional pair of eyes and could actually see what was behind him. No, in all directions, and there was no dead end. This was the effect of spiritual power. It was really too practical. Would anyone still be able to sneak attack him in the future? However, this required him to actively channel spiritual power, and spiritual power was the same as the mystical power in his body. There would come a time when it would be exhausted. If he continued to cultivate and strengthen his spiritual power, he would naturally be able to channel it for a longer period of time. Naturally, Ling Han used spiritual power to observe himself. He wanted to see his meridians. When spiritual power was shifted onto himself, boom, it was as if he had entered into a new world. This was a dimension that had been nurtured from the countless cells in his body. He was like an immortal, and could see all the mountains and rivers on every dimension, every blade of grass and every tree, man and beast. The Empress, Hunyo, his parents, son, and daughter. A gratified expression appeared on Ling Han's face. He had finally seen his family again. Though they had only been apart for a few months this time, which was far from the time that he had gone into seclusion before, he was still filled with excitement. The flow of time in the two worlds was different. 1 year here was equivalent to 1,000 epochs in the Genesis world. However, with a sweep of his spiritual power, Ling Han felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Only 100 or so days had passed in the dimensions inside his body. Was this because he had been born from the divine stone and fused with the world here, so the dimensions in his body had also synchronized in time? That ought to be the case. Ling Han wanted to communicate with the Empress and the others, but discovered that he could only see, as if he was a soul that had no physical body. Though his spiritual power had swept over them repeatedly, the Empress and the others did not react at all. It looked like this was because his spiritual power was too weak. This was equivalent to giving him a calming pill. As long as his spiritual power became slightly stronger, he would be able to communicate with the Empress and the others, and if he was even stronger, he might be able to release them. Good. This was really very good. Young master, you're awake? The little female attendant appeared, her face filled with pleasant surprise. Ling Han got up, and seeing that he was very hungry, he asked, "Is there anything to eat?" "Yes, yes, yes." Huan Shui hurriedly nodded. "Young master, you slept for 3 days and 3 nights. You scared Huan Shui to death." She patted her chest with all her might, as if she wasn't afraid of her chest being flattened at all. He had slept for so long? It looked like he had overdrawn his body greatly. Ling Han got off the bed. The living room was right outside the bedroom. It was a very small area. Huan Shui brought over dishes and rice, and Ling Han began to eat. After filling his stomach, Ling Han asked, "Where's my disc?" I don't know," Huan Shui said, her gaze flickering. And Ling Han's expression became serious. "Young master." Huan Shui was instantly scared pale, and she said, "Just forget about the Banner Lord Lien. Big Brother Wang and the others already said that Banner Lord Lien definitely won't fall in love with anyone. You're just digging your own grave and hurting yourself." What was going on here? Ling Han's mouth twitched slightly. Who in the world told this little girl that he had fallen in love with Lien Shuerong? Where do you keep getting these crazy ideas? He shook his head. That is the divine intent disc. It's used to cultivate one's spiritual power. Only now did Huan Shui realize that she had made a mistake. She couldn't help but blush, feeling very embarrassed. She took out the divine intent disc from the drawer and handed it over to Ling Han. In the end, she did not dare to throw it away. Ling Han shook his head with a smile. After taking the divine intent disc, he began to push that white dot again. With his spiritual power, the white dot moved. However, the veined patterns were like a wall, and thus the white dot could only move within the grooves. And this was a labyrinth. Ling Han stimulated the white, and very soon, he encountered a dead end. Then he retreated and found a new path. After a while, he felt mentally weary and could not continue. Practicing over and over again like this, one's spiritual power would be slowly strengthened. Ling Han nodded. So that was the case. With my rate of advancement, is it considered fast or slow? Because his spiritual power had already been exhausted, and there didn't seem to be any way to recover it quickly. Ling Han went to study formations instead. He grasped more and more basic formation patterns, and believed that he could already lay out some simple formation patterns. Let's take a look around the city. He did not bring his little female attendant with him, but rather walked around the city by himself. Huju City was much larger than the ancient Tao sect. The architectural styles here were diverse. There were ancient stone and wood buildings, as well as high-rise buildings made of steel and concrete. There's a formations shop? Ling Han stopped at the entrance of a shop. The words, "There's a formations shop," were written on it. And a very unique name. Ling Han thought for a moment, then walked into the shop. This shop wasn't big, and Ling Han was able to walk straight in. Moreover, it was only a single-story building. Compared to the high-rise buildings in the surroundings, it seemed very out of place. There was an old man sitting lifelessly in the shop. He was resting with his eyes closed. Even though he clearly heard someone enter, he didn't open his eyes to greet the customers. And just like the name of this store, the old man had a lot of personality. Ling Han looked around. Every set of formations was placed in a glass display case. There was only the name of the formations and a brief description, as well as the price. The staff in this shop was very lazy. So lazy that he would rather write down all the information than speak to others. The formation techniques are really expensive. Ling Han was dumbfounded. Even the cheapest set of formation techniques would cost 10,000 Dark North coins. Dark North coin was the currency issued by the nation. Outside of the Dark North nation, this currency was useless. However, in the Dark North nation, no matter what kind of transaction it would have to be paid in Dark North coins. Otherwise, there would be severe punishment. And the Dark North coin was linked to the Jade Seed. One Jade Seed could be exchanged for 100 coins. In other words, the cheapest formation was equivalent to 100 Jade Seeds. This was very, very expensive. For example, Wang Feng and the others only received a monthly allowance of 5,000 coins. Moreover, this was only because they were captains of the Shenqing banner. For normal solidars, they would only receive a monthly allowance of 800 coins. Old man, are there any formations for sale? Ling Han asked. The old man opened his eyes, his expression filled with impatience. Brat, is there something wrong with your eyes or your brain? Isn't it written very clearly already? TSK, he could actually do business like this? Ling Han chuckled and said, Uncle, you've misunderstood. I don't want to buy completed formations, but the diagram of formations that I could set up. And the old man revealed an astounded expression. He raised his head and surveyed Ling Han carefully. Brat, you want to learn formations? That's right. Ling Han nodded. The old man laughed loudly. If you were the disciple of some formation master, you naturally would not have to find formations to examine. That must mean you are studying formations on your own. And you have cultivated spiritual power? Ling Han chuckled and didn't reply. In the entire Dark North nation, there weren't many people who had cultivated spiritual power, so it was best for him to hide his strength for a while. The old man cast a second look at Ling Han, then took out a book from a drawer behind him, and tossed it over to Ling Han. Take it. How much? Ling Han asked. I'll give it to you. The old man waved his hand. It's just an old book. It's not worth much. Ling Han gave an "oh" and said, Then thank you, uncle. He stuffed the book into his robes. It was really very thin. If you've mastered formations, you can bring them to our store for consignment, and we'll collect a 10% fee for the sale, the elder said. Ling Han smiled. All right. He turned to leave. After a while, another person walked in, his expression appearing very respectful. Greetings, Uncle Nyo. This was an old man that looked to be in his 60s, but he was hale and hearty in spirit. He was dressed in long robes and had the air of nobility about him. The old man in the shop immediately closed his eyes and acted as if he had not seen anything. He was putting on airs. The old man who had just arrived was called Gu Tianhe, and he was the chairperson of Huzhu City's Formations Association. Due to the unique nature of formations, his status was extremely high. Even if the city lord came, he would have to be polite in front of him. Hence, if outsiders saw this scene, they would definitely be so shocked that their eyes would pop out. What was going on here? Someone actually dared to put on airs in front of Chairperson Gu? Gu Tianhe smiled bitterly. Who asked this old man to be his senior? And one with a terrible temper at that. He continued, "It's almost time for the formations competition that is held once every 3 years. The branch needs to select a person to go to the imperial capital. Tianhe would like to ask Uncle if there is anyone that he would like to recommend." Actually, as the chairperson of the Formations Association that ruled over the city, it was entirely up to him to decide who he would send to the imperial capital to participate next year. However, this Uncle Nyo of all people was his senior. He had to come and ask for instructions, even if it was just for show. "Get out! Don't come and bother me!" Uncle Nyo waved his hand, looking completely annoyed by the other person. Gu Tianhe could only turn around and leave. This was not outside of his expectations. He only felt that it was a pity. In the past, Nyo Huaqing had been so full of vigor, but now, life was ever-changing. Ling Han walked around again. There were alchemical pills, formations, conventional weapons, firearms, and so on and so forth being sold here. Conventional weapons were mainly prized for their sharpness and sturdiness, while firearms were limited to normal caliber guns. This was actually not much of a deterrent to cultivators above 6 meridians. However, there were actually talisman weapons sold here. This was expensive, and it was not just any ordinary price. In fact, it was not something that could be sold just because you had the funds. One also had to have a corresponding status. At present, Ling Han was a savage. Of course, he could not buy firearms or even cold weapons. He observed them from behind the counter, and discovered that the descriptions for these talisman weapons weren't written with ink or other materials. Instead, they were written with blood. Strange. He thought for a moment, but still decided to go back and fiddle with the formations. Ling Han returned to his residence and began to flip through the book on formations. This was a psychedelic formation, and it was extremely simple. It could only target meridian opening tier elites, and if one had attained the blood transformation tier, they would be able to influence the power of heaven and earth with a single punch, thereby breaking through the formation. Formations were used to stimulate and change the great power of heaven and earth. This would require 36 basic formation patterns to be inscribed on the 9 formation foundations. When inscribing formation patterns, one would also need to instill spiritual power into the formation patterns. Otherwise, those would only be dead patterns. "I'll try it out with ordinary wood first." Ling Han had already learnt these 36 formation patterns, but because all the formation patterns would slowly disappear in his mind, he first studied the corresponding formation patterns carefully before inscribing them. Then, he stimulated his spiritual power and began to carve on the wood. 1, 2, 3. After drawing 9 formation patterns, the spiritual power that he had recovered with great difficulty was once again exhausted, and he could only stop to rest. At night, a soldier came over and informed Ling Han that he would report to the base of Xianxia Banner tomorrow morning. Ling Han pondered for a moment and decided to take a good rest. The next day, Xianxia Banner's base, Team 7. The 8 team members all looked towards the entrance of the camp, as if they were anticipating someone to come. "Today, the new deputy captain is coming. Hee. I really want to see how handsome this guy is. To actually be able to enchant even our banner lord. We definitely have to take him down a notch and make him retreat in the face of difficulties. Without true strength, to say nothing of being our captain, he wouldn't even be qualified to join Xianxia Banner." "That's right." A sturdy man of about 35 or 36 years old nodded. "Little Zhang later, you go and challenge this deputy captain." "All right." A young man who looked to be in his 20s nodded, while the others crossed their arms over their chests. They were sure that Zhang Honglang would be enough to deal with him. At this time, a young man appeared at the entrance to the base camp. It was Ling Han. "Is it that brat?" "Probably. I've never seen him before, and he fits the description as well. He looks to be in his late teens. All right, let's wait for him to come. The members of Team 7 were all rubbing their fists, waiting for Ling Han to come over. The camp of Xianxia Banner was very large. Though there were only about 100 people in the whole camp, and even with the support staff there would not be more than 200, this camp took up about 10 acres of land. Because this was outside the city, they could choose any empty land. Ling Han strode forwards, heading towards where Team 7 was. There was absolutely no need to worry that he would not be able to find the location, because there was a flag erected where every team was located. On it were the words, First Unit, Second Unit, and so on. So you are Ling Han? 8 men of varying ages approached. Ling Han swept an eye over them and said calmly, If I'm not wrong, you guys are members of Team 7, and if I remember correctly, I just happen to be your deputy captain. He paused, then continued, Is this how you guys greet the deputy captain? Hee, if you want to be our deputy captain, you have to first obtain our approval. Otherwise, you would only be nothing in front of us. A sturdy man in his 30s said, That's right, the deputy captain should be our brother Lu instead. The youngest young man, Zhang Honglang, said. This brother Lu was called Lu Jing, and his cultivation level was 11 meridians. He had been in Team 7 for close to 10 years, and was extremely experienced. Furthermore, he was a very loyal person, so he had naturally gained the support of the other team members. Oh, so you guys are going to take me down a notch? Ling Han asked with a smile. This isn't called taking you down a notch. We only want to spar with the deputy captain, Lu Jing said with a smile. He was extremely dissatisfied. Their former deputy captain had been killed in the beast suppression mission not too long ago, so he was naturally very upset about it. However, in terms of seniority, he should be the deputy captain, and not this young man that had popped out from who knows where. Ling Han took a look. The captain of Team 7 was Tang Hai, whom he had known since long ago at Sealed Mountains. But now, Tang Hai had not appeared. What did this mean? The other party must have known that his subordinates would target Ling Han, yet deliberately avoided revealing it. It was obvious that he wanted Ling Han to solve this problem himself. There was only one way to win the respect of these warriors: strength. Thus, even if Tang Hai appeared and helped Ling Han resolve this rebellion, these people would stop causing trouble now. But what about in the future? Would they submit to Ling Han? Ling Han smiled faintly. Since that was the case, then let's battle. Who's going to attack first? He asked as he looked at the 8 people. Me, Zhang Honglang called out. Since I'm the deputy captain, I'll let you have the advantage of one hand. Ling Han clasped his right hand behind his back. Zhang Honglang was instantly enraged and shouted loudly, I don't need you to give me an advantage. Hee, make your move. Ling Han crooked a finger at his opponent with his left hand. Zhang Honglang hesitated for a moment before resolutely saying, You asked for this. Peng, with a stamp of his feet, he charged towards Ling Han. He was at 10 meridians. Before he drew near, his attack had already arrived. It turned into a crescent blade that charged towards Ling Han. Ling Han shot out a fist, greeting the other's attack. Peng, the power of the blows clashed, instantly forming a shockwave that spread out in all directions. In this exchange, the two of them were evenly matched. This brat can actually fight little Zhang to a tie? He's not as weak as the rumors say. However, little Zhang hasn't used overlap yet. Once he uses it, that brat would definitely be no match. He came from a remote village, after all. Tang Hai and the others had all said it. They definitely did not believe that Ling Han could defeat Zhang Honglang. Even just a tie was definitely impossible. Zhang Honglang's attacks were extremely fierce. He used both fists and kicks, and every move was a technique to kill. This was very normal. If soldiers did not cultivate the art of killing, what was the point of cultivating? Ling Han casually responded. Since they would all be his soldiers in future, he decided to go easy on him so that he would not lose too badly. The two of them were just embroiled in a lively battle when they suddenly heard a commotion coming from the entrance of the camp. There were also a great many people running towards that direction. What had happened? Little Zhang, stop first, Lu Jing said. Zhang Honglang stopped as he said. He turned around and asked, Brother Lu, what is it? Something seems to have happened. Lu Jing waved his hand. Let's go and take a look. Voila, in an instant all 8 of them ran towards the entrance of the camp. What was this? Ling Han stroked his chin. This was a little awkward. He was just left out like this? He also strolled towards the entrance of the camp. He had just arrived there, when he saw a figure fall down from the skies. The figure just happened to land at his feet. Ha 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 ha. Xianxia banner is really led by a woman. Nothing but a bunch of spineless bastards. A voice rang out, instantly causing the dozens of soldiers at the entrance of the camp to all look furious. Surrounded by the crowd was a young man who looked to be only in his 20s. He was dressed in a tight-fitting black suit, completely outlining his slender yet well-built figure. A little bit behind him, there were 2 brawny men standing with their arms crossed over their chests. They were shirtless, and their arms were so thick that they could be compared to thighs. Judging by the color of their clothes, these 3 people were clearly different from the others. They were all dressed in black. These were the soldiers of Yunma Banner. Ling Han had previously found out that there were a total of 4 elite troops in the Huju city, and they were Xianxia Banner, Dihuang Banner, Tianhuang Banner, and Yunma Banner. These 4 troops were on the same side, and there was also competition among themselves. By the looks of it, Xianxia Banner was the weakest of the 4 troops, whether it was in terms of overall strength or individual elites. Could not be helped. The Xianxia Banner had only been established in the last 15 years, so in terms of background, it naturally could not compare to the other 3 teams. Furthermore, because the Banner Lord of the Xianxia Banner was the only woman, in this world of martial arts where a man would have a greater advantage, they would naturally be viewed differently. The 4 teams frequently challenged each other, and the one who was provoked the most was naturally Xianxia Banner. There was no other reason. They were too weak, and now Yunma Banner had come to challenge them again. The young man looked disdainfully at the surroundings, his eyes looking down on everyone. Is there anyone who can fight? Haha, within 10 meridians, I can give you an advantage one hand, and even if it is in 11 meridians, it is not impossible for me to fight them. How arrogant! Someone from the Xianxia Banner said through gritted teeth. Who will go up and deal with him? It can't be helped. He's Zhu Lang, and although he can't be ranked in the top 10 among the younger generation, he can at least be ranked in the top 20. This kind of person would be the top prodigy of a city, and has a chance of entering the imperial capital in the future. But how could it be that we would just stand by and watch him act audaciously? The people of Xianxia Banner were all incredibly furious. But this kind of challenge was also very particular. A 10 meridians naturally should be fighting against a 10 meridians, and an 11 meridians should be placed against another 11 meridians. And now, a 10 meridians had come from the Yunma Banner. If Xianxia Banner had to mobilize an 11 meridians or 12 meridians to deal with him, then there would be no need for them to exist in the future. Moreover, Zhu Lang was indeed very powerful. No 11 meridians dared to say that they could firmly suppress him. If even an 11 meridians was defeated by him, then the whole Xianxia Banner would lose face. Weak, truly weak. Zhu Lang shook his head and said, The way I see it, there's no need for the Xianxia Banner to exist at all. Huju City only needs 3 banners. This mockery was enough to drive anyone crazy. Zhu Lang, let me battle you. A young man jumped out and charged towards Zhu Lang. Zhu Lang sneered and merely shot out a palm strike. Pung, that young man was sent flying. Like a scarecrow, he flew out of the crowd and landed heavily on the ground, coughing up blood continuously. Too weak, he said coldly. However, at least you still dare to attack. You're not a coward, so cowardly that you don't even have balls. Bastard! Another young man rushed out, but Zhu Lang merely shot out a kick. There was clearly still 3 meters between them, but the force of the kick had already reached him and sent him flying. He had unleashed his power 3 meters without any weakening of force. This was the standard of 11 meridians. No wonder this person was so arrogant. He was a 10 meridians who possessed the battle prowess of the peak stage of 11 meridians, so it did indeed qualify him to be as arrogant as this. If a 12 meridians didn't appear, who could compete with him? Group battle? Hehe. Then Xianxia banner would never be able to raise their heads high again. There's no need to fight such trash. Zhu Lang shook his head, his expression filled with disdain. Heh! In the huge Xianxia banner, aren't there any that can fight? Ha ha ha! The two brawny men from Yunma banner behind him laughed loudly, similarly filled with disdain. Everyone was extremely furious. A few more young people jumped out to accept the challenge, but they were all sent flying with a single move. Among the 10 meridians, there was really no one that could match Zhu Lang. Zhang Honglang moved, wanting to charge out. He really couldn't bear it any longer. Even if he was defeated, he would still fight. However, he had just raised his foot when he felt a heavy weight on his shoulder. A hand pressed down on him, preventing him from taking the second step. He turned around to take a look. Wasn't this their cheap deputy captain? You're no match for him, Ling Han said calmly. Zhang Honglang raised a brow. So what if he wasn't a match? How could it be that he would choose not to fight just because of that? You coward, not only did you not dare to make a move, you did not even allow him to make a move either. You are definitely a coward. Coward! Don't stop me, Zhang Honglang roared. However, no matter how much he struggled, he couldn't move a single inch. If he thought about this question carefully, he would definitely look shocked. But now that his anger had gone to his head, how could he still calm down to consider the problem? Hearing this, the Xianxia banner warriors in the surroundings all glared angrily at Ling Han, their eyes filled with disdain. What did they hate the most in the army? Cowards. It was inevitable that they would encounter incredibly powerful enemies. How could it be that they would retreat without a fight? No, what was needed at this time and of the highest priority was to help one another and unite, but the moment someone became a deserter, they would be done for. It was very possible that the whole team would be defeated in an instant. Hence, one after another, the young people rushed forwards fearlessly, knowing that they would definitely lose, and no one stepped forwards to stop them. This was for the sake of their pride, and for the sake of their glory. Wasn't this guy the deputy captain that had been newly promoted by the Banner Lord? Was such a coward even worthy? Just get lost. Ha ha ha. Zhu Lang laughed loudly, and looked towards Ling Han and Zhang Honglang. This is the smart move, but this also allowed me to see clearly that the Xianxia banner are only cowards. The soldiers of the Xianxia banner were all howling in fury. This practically drove them mad with fury. To them, their glory was their life, and was more important than their lives. At this moment, their disdain for Ling Han was far greater than their hatred for Zhu Lang. Ling Han sighed. Why were these people so rash? He shook his head and said, I'm your captain, so it's not your turn to fight yet. With a light wave of his hand, Zhang Honglang involuntarily retreated. Tung, 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 he crashed backwards into the crowd. Ling Han strode toward Zhu Lang. Ha ha! Coward! You've been embarrassed by others, so you had no choice but to run out? Zhu Lang sneered. What I hate the most are cowards and spineless bastards. Against people like you, I won't send you flying with a single strike. Instead, I'll slowly deal with you. Ling Han smiled calmly. You speak too much nonsense. He shot forward like an arrow, then threw a heavy punch. Boom! He didn't use any techniques and he just threw a simple punch. You're overestimating yourself. Zhu Lang sneered, and also threw a punch back at Ling Han. Pong! The two of them could release their power, and when there was a distance of 9 meters between them, the power collided. Then Zhu Lang's expression changed drastically. It was as if the power he shot out had encountered a dam, and could not advance the slightest bit. Then, the dam turned into a boundless wave that surged towards him. Then he was sent flying. Just like those who had been sent flying by his strikes previously, he was sent flying out of the crowd. Then, he fell heavily onto the ground, coughing up blood continuously. Fuck! Everyone was dumbfounded. What was going on here? Zhu Lang was actually sent flying with a single move? Though this guy was a 10 meridians, his battle prowess was completely comparable to an 11 meridians, even a peak stage 11 meridians. Who could believe this? They all looked towards Ling Han. This young man looked to be a few years younger than even Zhu Lang, but his battle prowess was so strong that he practically looked like a monster. "Good one, Captain Ling. Good fight." There was a scattered cheer. These were the 5 people who had witnessed Ling Han's terrifying power on the warship. Previously, they had not dared to shout, fearing that they would be beaten to death by their companions. But now that Ling Han had sent Zhu Lang flying, they naturally had no more reservations. It was a shame that they hadn't been able to transfer to Ling Han's team. Otherwise, they would have been even more proud. Zhang Honglong's expression was filled with shock. For a moment, he couldn't wrap his head around it. Wasn't this deputy captain locked in a fierce battle with him? How could he manage to send Zhu Lang flying with a single punch? What was going on? This was incomprehensible. "Idiot. The deputy captain was lenient towards you at that time." A member of Team 7 lightly smacked the back of Zhang Honglong's head. Only now did Zhang Honglang come to his senses. When he looked at Ling Han again, his eyes were filled with deep respect. His abilities were clearly far superior, but for the sake of his pride, he actually deliberately tied with him. "TSK, what an exceptional captain." Ling Han smiled faintly and withdrew his fist. "You speak so boldly, yet the result is that you are not the slightest bit durable." The entire Xianxia banner fell silent for a short while, then suddenly erupted in a thunderous roar. This was too satisfying. This new deputy captain was too awesome. Great, just beat him to near death. Who asked him to be condescending and arrogant? The other 2 soldiers from Yunma banner also started to panic. What was going on? A 12 Meridians elite had made a move. They immediately said, "How shameless! Using an elite of 12 Meridians to suppress him. An unjust victory would only be more humiliating." They didn't believe that a 10 Meridians or 11 Meridians could defeat Zhu Lang with a single strike. Even the prodigies ranked in the top 10 in the city couldn't do it. Yes, perhaps the monster in the first place could, but it definitely couldn't be the person in front of them. Ling Han appeared calm and unruffled. "You can eat whatever you like, but you can't speak irresponsibly." He charged out. Pong, pong, 2 punches landed, and the 2 sturdy men were also sent flying. With his full power channeling, every meridian in his body emitted a faint glow, a total of 10 of them. His cultivation level of 10 meridians was clear at a glance. The members of Xianxia banner all became excited. Some roared at the sky, some raised their weapons high and brandished them repeatedly, while others danced around in joy. On the other side, Zhu Lang finally got back to his feet slowly. Although he had been sent flying, he hadn't suffered any serious injuries. It was just that he couldn't think straight for the moment, so he continued to lie on the ground. How had he lost? "Who are you?" he asked. "Xianxia banner, the deputy captain of Team 7, Ling Han." Ling Han said calmly. "Deputy captain? That would have to be an 11 meridians, at least. In fact, in some teams, it wouldn't be strange for a 12 meridians to be the deputy captain. And to be able to send him flying with a single punch, that definitely had to be the power of 12 meridians. Fuck! A 12 meridians was bullying him with his advantage of a higher cultivation level. He was defiant. "Your Xianxia banner is really too shameless. You actually sent a 12 meridians to sneak attack me," Zhu Lang said through gritted teeth. Pooh! Everyone's expressions were filled with disdain, giving Zhu Lang a merciless mockery. 12 meridians? Just now, Ling Han had already publicly announced that he was a 10 meridians, just a 10 meridians. If he couldn't win, he couldn't win, but he still had so many excuses. He really was a sore loser. Zhu Lang couldn't help but find it strange. "What's with your expressions? You're clearly using an elite of 12 meridians to suppress me, but why am I the one who looks like an idiot?" "Ling Han! Ling Han! Ling Han!" The people of Xianxia banner all shouted loudly. In this moment, they had completely accepted this deputy captain. Hence, it was really very simple to win respect as long as one had enough strength. Ling Han looked around and asked, "Where's the base of Yunma banner?" Everyone was startled. What did Ling Han mean by asking this question? Someone who had quick reflexes immediately came to his senses and said, "Deputy Captain, are you planning to challenge Yunma banner?" Of course, reciprocity requires reciprocation. How could they be the only ones to cause trouble? Ling Han said calmly. I'll take you there. I'll bring you there too. I'm going too. All of a sudden, everyone was excited, as if they had been pumped full of adrenaline. All this while, it was the three great banners that had come to cause trouble, while Xianxia banner was forced to accept the challenge. Most of the time, they had to swallow the bitter fruit of defeat and allow their opponent to humiliate them as they liked. Could not be helped. There really was no elite-level prodigy to turn the tide. Now that Ling Han said he was going to launch a counterattack at Yunma banner, it naturally ignited the emotions that had been suppressed in everyone's hearts. Everyone raised their arms and called out, wanting to work alongside Ling Han. Meanwhile, Lu Jing sighed inwardly. It was only an instant, and the members of Team 7 had all become Ling Han's loyal supporters. His position as deputy captain was already firm and unshakable. It had to be said that even he had been impressed by Ling Han. Following such a young, promising, and heroic deputy captain should be very enjoyable. Charge! Everyone was shouting, as if they weren't going to Yunma banner to challenge them, but going to war. Ling Han led the way, and almost all of Xianxia banner's troops were mobilized. Over 80 people surrounded Ling Han, as if he was Xianxia banner's banner lord. Really, aside from Lian Shuerong, what other captain would have such prestige? Where should we go? Ling Han had just walked out of the base camp when he stopped and asked the person behind him. This question almost caused everyone to fall to the ground. Fuck! Right now, everyone's mood is hot as fire. However, your sudden question is far too demoralizing, no? However, hearing this, everyone laughed out loud. This deputy captain seemed to have a natural talent for jokes. Let's walk to the left first, someone said as they led the way. Ling Han continued to lead the way, and the others followed behind him. Behind them, Zhu Lang and the other two men from Yunma banner also followed. They were still a little dazed. What had gotten into these people from Xianxia banner today that they would actually dare to be so insolent at the base of their Yunma banner? The encampments of the four banners were distributed in the four corners of the city. Thus, no matter which part of the city was in turmoil, there would always be an elite troop that could move out quickly to suppress the unrest. Thus, there was still some distance from here to Yunma banner. After walking for about an hour, Yunma banner's army camp was finally within sight. They discovered the camp, and the people in the camp also discovered them. Of course, there were sentry posts here. Otherwise, if they encountered the barrage of attacks from demonic beasts, wouldn't they die without even knowing that they were going to die? Instantly, the camp sounded the alarm. Fuck! A dark mass of people surged over. This lineup was really too big, wasn't it? In a short while, a large group of people rushed out of the camp's entrance. Some of them weren't even dressed completely, looking extremely disheveled. Weren't these the people of Xianxia banner? Have you all come to fight a war? Xianxia banner, what do you guys want? In the camp, someone shouted and asked. Although Xianxia banner was the weakest of the four banners, they weren't much weaker either. Once a huge battle broke out, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even if Yunma banner won, it was inevitable that they would be severely punished. Those in a higher position were most afraid of chaos in the army. Could it be that the Xianxia banner, no longer able to bear the humiliation, had finally exploded? We have come to issue a challenge. Just Yunma banner are allowed to issue a challenge, and we can't do the same? Challenge! The members of Xianxia banner all shouted in excitement. This was something that had never happened before, and it made their blood boil with excitement. The people of Yunma banner all exchanged looks. A challenge? Have you all taken the wrong medicine today? Right at this moment, Zhu Lang and the others walked over. Captain, Xianxia banner has gone too far. They mobilized the 12 meridians and beat up Xiao Lang. A sturdy man immediately said. We protested for a while and they beat us up as well, the other sturdy man said. Zhu Lang, on the other hand, remained silent. In this way, the entire Yunma banner was in an uproar. Fuck, your Xianxia banner is really too shameless. Isn't it? How shameless. Brothers, grab your weapons. Let's do it. The people of Yunma Banner all shouted, raising their weapons high. Ling Han stepped out bravely. If things continued to develop, it would become a gang fight. I was the one who defeated Zhu Lang. He raised his voice. Eh? The people of Yunma Banner all looked at Ling Han in shock. This was the 12 Meridians? But he was too young, wasn't he? By the looks of it, he was not yet 20 years old. Indeed, if it was a battle of a 12 Meridians against a 10 Meridians, that would be bullying, but if both of them were around the same age, that would be another matter. It is your cultivation speed that is too slow, so you can't blame others, right? I am a 10 Meridians, Ling Han said seriously. He said calmly, however, I don't mind who you send. Whether it is 10 Meridians, 11 Meridians, or 12 Meridians, I will accept them all. He channeled his power, and the 10 meridians that had already been opened in his body immediately emitted a faint light. It really was the 10 meridians. The people of Yunma Banner were both shocked and curious. They all turned their eyes to Zhu Lang. Was this really the person who had defeated him? Meanwhile, Zhu Lang's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe this at all. Ling Han was really a 10 meridians. Fuck, he had been defeated by a 10 meridians? How was this possible? His natural talent in cultivation was enough to be ranked in the top 20 in the whole city. There were only a limited number of people that could defeat him, and at present there were even fewer that were 10 meridians like him. To say the least, even if those few people moved, it was definitely impossible that they would be able to defeat him with a single punch. This was completely one-sided. Seeing that Zhu Lang did not speak, the people of Yunma Banner naturally could not confirm either. Let me fight you. A 10 Meridians martial artist jumped out. It was impossible that no one would accept a challenge when an opponent was calling out right at their doors. He charged towards Ling Han, but before he could even throw a punch, he was sent flying with a slap from Ling Han. He couldn't even withstand a single blow. Fuck! So powerful! The people of Yunma Banner all thought internally. To defeat a cultivator of the same cultivation level with a single strike, he was definitely on the level of a prodigy. Even among those noble families in the city, he could at least be ranked in the top 20. When did the Xianxia Banner recruit such a prodigy? Good one! Xianxia Banner's soldiers roared. Some of them almost screamed their throats out. They had been waiting for this moment for too long. Next, Ling Han said calmly. This kind of careless, relaxed attitude caused Yunma Banner to burn with fury, while Xianxia Banner was filled with high spirits. I'll go! Another 10 Meridians cultivator leaped out and charged at Ling Han. However, he would only be delivering himself up to be defeated. Next, Ling Han didn't say anything extravagant, and his expression was extremely calm. However, it was this kind of uncaring display that caused the people of Yunma Banner to feel greatly humiliated. In Ling Han's eyes, could they be considered a match at all? You are really too condescending. Ah! A person rushed out with a roar, yet was easily sent flying with a palm strike from Ling Han. He would again deal with the next one with a single palm strike. After a consecutive 7 people, Zhu Lang finally stepped out, faced the people of Yunma Banner and said, 10 Meridians and even 11 Meridians can't possibly be a match for him, because I was defeated by him in a single move. He really didn't want to see his comrades being defeated one after another, so he revealed the scandal of him being instantly defeated by Ling Han in front of everyone. What? Had Zhu Lang really been defeated by this young man? 10 Meridians against 10 Meridians, instantly defeated with a single move? This! The people of Yunma Banner all fell silent. Even Zhu Lang had been defeated, so who in the same cultivation level could be a match for Ling Han? Ling Han's eyes swept over them. Next! But this time, no one else from Yunma Banner came out to fight. Those who are 12 Meridians, come out. Ling Han crooked a finger at them. I don't mind. The people of Yunma Banner remained silent for a while longer. Only then did a man in his 30s walk out. There was a long scar at the corner of his lips, and his hair was disheveled, looking like he was a maniac. Luo Ziyuan. He pointed at himself. I will only use 10 moves. If you can block them, then it would be considered that our Yunma Banner has lost today. Captain Luo, the people of Yunma Banner all exclaimed in shock. And Luo Ziyuan glanced at everyone. You guys don't believe me? Everyone stopped talking. This Luo Ziyuan was known as Yunma Banner's #1 god of war, and among 12 meridians, he could be considered one of the top elites. If Luo Ziyuan was also unable to defeat Ling Han, then unless the Banner Lord was dispatched, there would be no one in the entire army that could be a match for Ling Han. The problem was, if it was only limited to 10 moves, wasn't that too little? Luo Ziyuan strode out. His figure was really tall, about 7 feet tall. He was so sturdy that he was at least as wide as 3 Ling Hans. The moment he walked out, his figure instantly cast a long shadow. The difference in size was too obvious. In front of him, Ling Han looked like a child. 10 moves. Luo Ziyuan said solemnly. I won't bully you either. The fact that a 12 meridians was fighting a 10 meridians was already bullying them to the point that they could be no more bullied than that. However, Hu asked that there was really no one under the 12 meridians that could restrain Ling Han. Ling Han smiled calmly. Whatever. Luo Ziyuan took a deep breath. Pu, piu, piu. All the veins in his body pulsated, releasing a powerful sound. It was as if there was a monster hidden in his body that was about to break out of his body. His hands actually turned crimson red, with steam rising from them. Crimson Flame Palm. Captain Luo has used his strongest move. This is a secret technique that Captain Luo obtained from an ancient site. Its might is boundless. No wonder Captain Luo said the limit of 10 moves. This is actually no different from 100 or 1,000 moves. The people of Yunma Banner were all excited. That godlike strongest captain of theirs was about to show his might. Ling Han smiled faintly. This crimson flame palm might be very powerful, but it was obvious that Luo Ziyuan wasn't able to unleash its full might. Otherwise, there should be flames entwined around his hands, and not just heat. Charge! Luo Ziyuan roared as he charged over. Luo Ziyuan's physique was astonishing, and as he charged forward, it was as if a massive beast was barreling towards him. Merely this aura alone was enough to scare a great many people to death. Scram! He roared loudly. Clapping his palms together, he delivered a palm strike at Ling Han. Boom! Endless power rolled out, turning into a powerful gust of wind. This attack was a little strong. Ling Han used the 4 directional fists to greet his opponent. Pong! In an exchange of blows, Ling Han's figure instantly slid back, while Luo Ziyuan stood proudly like a mountain. Ling Han took 3 steps back, then 2 steps back. Then, he took another 20+ steps back. This brawny man had attained the 6th layer in terms of power overlap. Ling Han was surprised. Up until now, this was the person with the most layers of power overlapping that he had seen. For directional fists couldn't win. Ling Han thought internally. For directional fists could only stack 2 overlapping layers of power, and his raw power was not as strong as Luo Ziyuan's. Thus, if he used the 4 directional fists against his opponent, he would be at a complete disadvantage. He didn't want to expose the demonic monkey fists, but he wasn't one to accept defeat. He clearly could win, so why should he lose on purpose? Let's do it. Good one, Captain Luo. Seeing that Luo Ziyuan had gained the upper hand with a single strike, the people from Yunma Banner all shouted loudly, cheering him on. One of the people from the Xianxia Banner mocked. It's just a matter of a 12 meridians bullying a 10 meridians. What is there to be so proud of? The two sides were embroiled in a war of words, and Luo Ziyuan also launched another attack, racing towards Ling Han. Ling Han charged forward nimbly, actively parrying the attack. The demonic monkey fists was used, and he superimposed 7 overlapping layers of power. Pong, 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 pong. He clashed with Luo Ziyuan. It was clearly just a single blow, yet it was as if they had exchanged 6 to 7 blows in an instant, with sharp sounds ringing out endlessly. Ling Han was sent backwards, but Luo Ziyuan was also sent backwards. Everyone was instantly confused. Who exactly was on the upper hand? Of course, only the 2 people involved knew best. Luo Ziyuan's expression was filled with seriousness. He was a peak stage 12 meridians, and his power was as high as 50,000 kilograms. Ling Han was naturally no match for him, and there was a gap of about a few thousand kg between them. The problem was that Ling Han's layers of power overlap had surpassed his. Thus, in the previous 6 waves of clashes, he had gained the upper hand, but he had not thought that Ling Han would actually be able to fire out the 7th layer of power overlap, which instantly caused him to retreat continuously. His 7 overlapping layers of power. An expression of shock appeared on his face. It should be known that it was also because he had accidentally obtained the secret technique, Crimson Flame Palm, that he had been able to use 6 overlapping layers of power. This already made him practically invincible among the 4 banners. But now, a person had appeared, and in terms of compounding layers of power, he had actually surpassed him. Could he defeat his opponent within 10 moves? Difficult as ascending the heavens. Ling Han released a battle cry and took the initiative to attack. He had never been the type to take a beating passively. Pong! 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 He and Luo Ziyuan battled fiercely, and in practically the blink of an eye, the 2 of them had already exchanged 10 moves. However, Ling Han had no intention of stopping. Luo Ziyuan naturally couldn't stand there and take a beating. Thus, the 2 of them were still fighting very fiercely. Was 7 overlapping layers of power still not enough to deal with it? Ling Han shouted lightly and overlapped his power to the 8th layer. Instantly, it was clear that he had the upper hand. Ling Han had to deal with his opponent as soon as possible. Meridian opening tier elites could only attack with their full strength for 2 hours. Even if his meridians were wider, and he could store more mystical power with 8 times acceleration of expenditure, he would only be able to last for just over 20 minutes. Thus, he had to deal with Luo Ziyuan as soon as possible. Ling Han burst out again. If 8 overlapping layers of power were still unable to achieve a quick victory, then he would use 9 overlapping layers of power. This burst of power from an additional overlapping layer of power was equivalent to having an additional 12 meridians attacking him. This was definitely no joke. Boom! This kind of burst of power was not something that Luo Ziyuan could match. He just barely managed to last over a dozen moves before he was struck by Ling Han's punch. He stumbled back more than a dozen steps, a trace of blood at the corner of his lips. He had lost, Luo Ziyuan had lost. All of a sudden, the entire Yunma banner fell silent. It should be known that Ling Han was only at 10 meridians and still had a massive room for growth. Now that Luo Ziyuan had lost, it meant that for a very, very long time, it was impossible that there would be another meridian opening tier that could threaten Ling Han. In fact, it could be said that Ling Han was already invincible in meridian opening tier. As long as one didn't advance into blood transformation tier, there would be no one at the same cultivation level as him. How could they not feel such dejection as if they had lost their parents? On the other hand, the people from Xianxia banner all roared in excitement. All of them looked as if they had been pumped full of adrenaline. This was really exalting. They had never felt so good before. Ling Han, Captain Ling. This seemed to have become the base camp of the Xianxia banner. It was filled with the roars of the Xianxia banner warriors. What are you shouting for? So noisy. The people from Yunma banner were already displeased, so they were naturally even more infuriated upon hearing this. Can't we? We're so happy. The people from Xianxia banner were still excited, so how could they stop? Fuck! Someone couldn't bear it any longer and threw out a rock. You dare to make a move? Beat him up. Boom, the situation immediately became irresolvable. At first, it was only a battle between a few people, but very quickly, it turned into a great battle royale. More than 100 people had gotten into a gang fight, and all of them were 10 meridians at least. When their power was released, they could easily injure others. The scene was really chaotic. Ling Han let out a battle cry. Group battles were his favorite activity. Stop! After at least 10 minutes, a voice filled with majesty and fury rang out. It was like thunder, causing everyone's ears to ring. Then, their blood boiled, as if their heads were about to explode. Instantly, everyone stopped. There were even some whose eyes were bleeding. A man leaped over from the distance. He looked to be in his 40s, and his expression was slightly sinister. He was wearing a tight-fitting white suit, and it could be seen that there was a blood-like aura boiling on his body. An elite of blood transformation tier. Greetings, Banner Lord. The people from Yunma banner all knelt down. Although the members of the Xianxia banner didn't kneel, they all lowered their heads slightly. This was a necessary respect for elites. This was the banner lord of Yunma banner, Ji Shuyu. Are you trying to rebel? Ji Shuyu asked coldly. His voice wasn't loud, yet it was enough to make people feel discomfort in their chests. It was as if all the blood in their bodies were about to boil. Blood transformation tier elites were too strong. This was a kind of qualitative suppression. You actually dare to cause trouble in the base camp. You guys are really outrageously bold. He swept an eye over all of them. Xianxia banner. What is going on with you guys? It's just a spar. So what need is there for Banner Lord Ji to make such a fuss? A gentle and melodious voice rang out, and Lian Xuerong's figure appeared as well. She was standing in front of Ji Shuyu. Wrapped in tight-fitting attire, her figure was shapely and curvaceous. You call this sparring? Ji Shuyu pointed at the crowd, and many people were bleeding and battered. If it's not sparring, then what is it? Lian Xuerong said coldly. She turned her head and said to the people of Xianxia banner, "You guys have a lot of free time, right? Looks like I haven't drilled you guys hard enough. Scram back with me immediately, and in the next 10 days your daily training will double." TSK. She was so protective of her own people. When such a huge matter was spoken from her mouth, it was like the two teams were just playing house. Hearing these words, the people from Xianxia banner all looked bitter. Their training volume had doubled. They were going to have a hard time. "What are you standing around for? Get lost," Lian Xuerong said with a cold expression. The people of the Xianxia banner hurriedly retreated. Lian Xuerong had absolute authority in their hearts. Ling Han followed behind. At this time he had best not stand out. After returning to Xianxia banner, not long after, Lian Xuerong returned. Her expression was cold, and she shouted harshly, "All of you come here." All the team members walked out, all of them as obedient as children. "How dare you all to actually run over Yunma banner for a gang fight? Humph! Why don't you all just go straight to the heavens then?" Lian Xuerong rebuked coldly. No one spoke, all of them with their heads bowed. "What is it? Now you know fear," Lian Xuerong said. She swept an eye over everyone, and the expression on her face gradually eased as she continued, "However, in the end, you have not embarrassed our Xianxia banner. Of course, we can all fight." Everyone immediately became lively again. "Banner Lord, we will definitely not embarrass you. All of us are fierce, every single one capable of fighting 10 people. However, after Lian Xuerong's pretty face stiffened, everyone fell silent again. In the Xianxia banner, she had absolute authority. "Tell me, what exactly is going on?" she asked. A deputy captain walked over and explained the whole story. Lian Xuerong looked towards Ling Han, a hint of surprise flickering in her eyes. She had not thought that Ling Han would actually be so powerful. Not only had he defeated Zhu Lang, he had even defeated Luo Ziyuan. What a freakish freak. Previously, she had appointed Ling Han as deputy captain, out of admiration for Ling Han's talent. It was also on a whim, and she had not thought too much about it, but this time she was really stunned. This brat was worthy of focused nurturing. "All right, all of you go out for training. By evening, if anyone still has the strength to stand, from tomorrow onwards, the training volume will increase tenfold," Lian Xuerong said coldly. Everyone was listless and began to train. However, as they fought, ran, and jumped, a smile slowly appeared on everyone's faces. Then they became more and more excited. "Today was really too awesome. Ling Han, follow me," Lian Xuerong said again. He couldn't escape. Ling Han could only follow Lian Xuerong and enter her commander's tent in the camp. "You're very good at fighting, aren't you?" Lian Xuerong asked with a faint smile. Ling Han didn't know what she meant, so he simply smiled and said, "Not too bad, not too bad. In another month, there will be a martial arts tournament held in the city, and you will represent Xianxia banner in the tournament," Lian Xuerong said. Ling Han was surprised. There was actually no punishment, and he was only asked to participate in some martial arts tournament? He chuckled. Then if I get first place, what kind of reward would there be? Lien Shuerong couldn't help but laugh in spite of herself. You don't even know who your opponents are? And you're already thinking of rewards? I have always been more confident, Ling Han said, slightly embarrassed. Lien Shuerong was speechless. After a while, she said, this is a gathering that is held every year in Huju City. Getting first place is more of an honor. However, it's not without rewards, but it's different every year, so I don't know either. However, among your opponents, there are a few freaks that are quite extraordinary. The one ranked number 1 also has the ability to battle an opponent with a cultivation level that is superior to him by 2 cultivation levels. Only now did Ling Han's expression change slightly. There was actually someone who could battle against an opponent with a cultivation level surpassing 2 cultivation levels. A strong fighting spirit rose up in him. He really wanted to fight with this person. Lien Shuerong saw the fighting spirit on his face and couldn't help but think, what kind of battle maniac is this guy? After learning of this kind of opponent, not only does he not feel the slightest bit of pressure, his fighting spirit actually soared. She continued, this person is already at 12 meridians. It said that he can now advance into blood transformation tier. It's completely because of this tournament that he didn't break through. At 12 meridians and also possessed freakish abilities that could fight with a gap of 2 cultivation levels, so how was he supposed to defeat them? Could Ling Han reach 12 meridians in a month? No, this was possible. Are there any restrictions in this tournament? Ling Han asked. For example, can formations be used as support? Do you really think you are a formation master? Lien Shuerong shook her head and said, you can't use talisman weapons, nor can you use high-level god tools. However, you can use formations. After all, in that little bit of time spent on the tournament stage, what formations could you set up? Hence, if you really could put it out, that would be your skill and it would have to be recognized. Ling Han nodded. In this way, he would have a chance of winning. Bannerlord, can I ask for leave to prepare for next month's competition? Ling Han asked. He wanted to spend more time on formations and not waste time on drills. Lien Shuerong thought for a moment, then said, all right, but if you can't get into the top 4, I'll make you double the amount of training in the following month. All right? Ling Han nodded. She was really underestimating him too much. He was aiming for first place. He was just about to leave, when he turned around and asked, how is Sect Master Sun? He's fine. He's currently recuperating and should need around a month's time, Lien Shuerong said casually. Only then did Ling Han leave. He had already asked for leave here, so Ling Han didn't feel much pressure. He began to study formations earnestly. He persevered in cultivating his spiritual power with the divine intent disc every day, improving every day. This was just the beginning, so his improvement was very fast. 10 days later, he was already able to walk out of the labyrinth with the white on the divine intent disc. After succeeding, the divine intent disc continued to emit a white light, as if it was telling the people around him that someone here had completed the test for the divine intent disc. And as his spiritual power increased greatly, Ling Han finally managed to create that psychedelic formation. With a casual toss, 9 formation foundations were distributed around him. He then stimulated them with his mental energy, and instantly the formation was activated. Huan Shui, he called. Young master, what's wrong? Where are you, young master? Huan Shui entered the room. It was obvious that Ling Han was standing opposite her, but she overlooked him as if Ling Han wasn't there at all. Ling Han was surprised. This psychedelic formation also had an invisibility function. He walked out of the formation, yet gave Huan Shui a scare, and she patted her chest hard. With such a heavy smack, would her chest really not break? You walk forwards, Ling Han said. Huan Shui walked in a daze. To say nothing of the fact that this was a room, even if it was really a mountain of blades and a sea of flames in front of her, she would still step in without hesitation. Young master, why can't I see clearly? Inside the psychedelic formation, Huan Shui spread open her arms, as if she had entered an extremely dark environment alone. Nothing could be seen clearly. It's fine, Ling Han said. He stepped forward to put away the formation foundations, and instantly, Huan Shui was out in the open again. Young master, what happened just now? Her face was filled with confusion. A mere formation, Ling Han said. Formation. Huan Shui was still confused. Ling Han gave a simple explanation, and Huan Shui immediately gave an "oh." So young master spends all his time fiddling with that whatever disc for the sake of cultivating formations. I've always wondered what's so interesting about that little white dot swaying here and there. Ling Han looked at the little handmaiden, a hint of surprise on his face.